Finally, summer vacation had arrived. The squad was hyped beyond belief, ready to chill and kick back. The crew was out there, living it up, celebrating the end of classes. From a distance, the boy with long hair was just watching it all go down. His face was kinda blah. He thought everyone was buzzing about the prep course, not the break from school. Plus, since he had to take the tests next year, the upcoming exams were gonna be brutal. For him, just stepping into this whole scene, everything felt super dull. Out of nowhere, his phone started ringing. It was the delivery dude asking where he was at that moment. Since he wasn't home, the guy couldn't drop off the package it had to be signed for. Wondering what was in the delivery, the boy said he was racing home to grab it. As he got closer to his place, he spotted the delivery guy. When he saw the package, his eyes went wide. There was a drawing of a sick flower on the box. Out of nowhere, he bolted towards the delivery guy. Being a student, the worker asked for his ID, but the boy was so pumped he totally ignored the request and snatched the box right out of his hands. The delivery guy was just standing there, confused. The kid looked just like his son, and seeing the game company logo made him anxious. No hello even. Once inside, the boy sprinted to open the box. His feet were moving so fast it felt like an earthquake. He slammed the door so hard it echoed. Without a second thought, he grabbed a knife to slice open the long-awaited box. His eyes lit up when he saw what was inside. It was an epic augmented reality headset. Along with it, there were 2 wristbands. Quickly, the boy flipped open the manual. The guide showed him step by step how to rock all the gear and enjoy its features. In a flash, he strapped on the wristbands. The augmented reality headset went on right after. After hitting the button on the right wristband, he noticed something super cool. The gear was scanning his biological signals, and he had to stay still while it did its thing. Finally, after a few moments, the tech glasses powered up. Everything around him looked the same. But then, the glasses thanked Lee Yushin for becoming a VIP online test player. Out of nowhere, a girl popped up, staring at him with a curious look. Seeing her made Lee super nervous and confused. He even stumbled back from the shock. She said if he was surprised just by entering augmented reality, he was in for a wild ride. Then she snapped her fingers and the whole scene changed, making him freak out even more. In seconds, his room transformed into a distant planet. With another snap, they were on a stunning beach. With each new backdrop, Lee Yushin was getting more and more spooked. The girl introduced him to the unforgettable game called Ilal Korea. Then she pulled out the invite she forgot to give him. She tossed the paper right to him, but he fumbled it like a total klutz. Once he grabbed it, he opened it without thinking. Suddenly, holograms started popping out. Seeing the city from the hologram, Lee Yushin was totally mesmerized. He even wondered if all of this was real. By the end of the day, he was buzzing, telling his parents he became a test player for a new game through a alleged competition. The soup for dinner wasn't even the most exciting topic at the table. A bit confused, Lee Yushin's dad asked if he wanted to be a tennis player or something, and how long this test would last. Without missing a beat, the boy said it would be 15 days and 14 nights, and he'd be paid by the hour. After hearing his son's plans, the man looked bored and negative. The dreamy boy just stared at him, shocked by the response, when he finally decided to break the silence and ask his dad. The man slammed the spoon on the table, cutting him off. This also startled his mom. Suddenly, the man started shouting, saying that the boy's 3 years in military school didn't teach him anything and being a test player was just wild. With each sermon, the boy got even angrier. Out of nowhere, he jumps up from the table, super upset, saying he'd respect his dad's decision. But the man keeps arguing with his son about the food left on the plate. Then his wife gets really mad, telling him to cut it out, since the boy wasn't going anywhere. She put some morals into that impulsive dude, tugging at his shirt. Looking at her sad son, she shows a thoughtful vibe. The boy couldn't believe he'd have to throw away such a good chance. But for real, he wasn't about to waste this unique opportunity, and he had a plan to dodge his dad's decision. After all this drama, the day of the big test finally arrives. Lee Yushin was already bouncing out of the house, heading to school supposedly. As soon as he shuts the door, he grabs his phone to check a location. Without a second thought, the boy hops on the subway to get there. Yushin lies to the teacher on the phone, saying his family was off on a trip for days. He totally gets lost when asked about the travel destination. Then luck strikes as a huge billboard with the city name pops up in front of him. Without thinking twice, he says his family was going to Quebec, Canada, which makes the teacher a bit suspicious. Noticing the woman's suspicion, Lee puts on a nervous face. But hey, the billboard said Canada was the best place to live, so that kinda justified the trip. Finally, Lee had solved the boring alibi problem, but he needed to prep for when his parents called the principal's office. Still, the boy decides to leave that for later, because for him, the most important thing right then was something else. And it was in that big building, which took a hot minute to reach. Without thinking twice, he steps inside. The headquarters of Real Online was the new goal of that dreamer boy. That would save Lee Yushin from his super boring routine. After a few minutes inside, a janitor approaches him. The dude even thinks he might be in the wrong place. Then, without a second thought, Yushin shows him his bracelet, the invite to the virtual kingdom. The boy felt important rocking that amulet, and his face totally showed it. Then he heads to the VIP area of the spot. After getting his access granted, he goes deeper into the building and sees screens that blow his mind. There were also a bunch of serious-looking people working on the project. Some players were packing impressive weapons that could wipe out anything. Others looked like real knights straight out of a medieval movie. Li Yuxin thought all of that was epic. Carefully checking out the place, he spots a kind of portal. That thing leaves him super confused as it was something totally new to him. In just a few seconds, the silhouette there weirdly disappears. Li Yuxin wonders what just happened. Suddenly, a giant dude with an angry face shows up. The boy jumps thinking it was a bug. The one-eyed man glares at him in a terrifying way, and out of nowhere charges at the protagonist, smashing the ground and sending him flying. Li Yuxin keeps wondering what that was all about. The man was chasing him for no reason. Li shouts desperately for that strange guy to chill out. He soon tries to hide in a nearby house, but his attempt flops as the man breaks through the wall, entering without any struggle. The guy held an axe that would scare anyone. Li had no clue what to do to stop his pursuer. He tried to disconnect from the game while the man got ready to finish him off. Then suddenly, the girl presenter of the game appears, trying to stop the pursuer. At that moment, the boy was in a rough spot, already giving up on life, but thankfully the girl manages to stop the pursuer with her quick moves. She explains that the enemy might seem overpowered, but he's actually a low-level opponent. Without thinking twice, the girl goes for the man. He doesn't even react when she attacks him. The girl's hand moves towards the man delicately and joins a series of moves that look magical, until finally hitting the enemy's body with major power, making him evaporate in a flash. Upon seeing this, Li Yuxin shows his shocked face. Then he strikes up a convo with the saving operator. She had a delicate vibe, but something still felt off. So the boy tries to figure out why the girl's voice sounds so weird. The girl hesitates a bit to spill the truth, leaving him on edge. But after a few seconds, she transforms into a dude, explaining why his voice is deep. The man then apologizes for that. He was teasing the kid because of his hilarious reactions and wouldn't stop joking around. Li Yuxin, hearing this, felt super embarrassed and ready to dig a hole to hide in. But there was still one thing that made it all worth it. As expected, everything was a blast. Li Hyungyu, the big boss of the test, finally introduces himself to Li Yuxin. Since the kid was also late, he quickly apologizes to the dude, worried he might get kicked out of the test for being tardy, but the guy just brushes it off. Moving on to the next demo. Actual reaction made the kid breathe a huge sigh of relief. With the clock ticking, they kick things off with a tour of the office before proper intros. After hearing this, the kid jumps at the chance, since the delay was on him, and heads off with the guide to the testing hall. In the elevator, they're both hyped, wearing big smiles. Someone on the phone was watching them through the cameras. That someone was the branch manager, Bermadot. After wrapping up his call, he hangs up. He wanted the product to sell for big bucks, so everything had to be on point. Then he switches off the TV where the kid and his buddy were being watched live. The gray-haired dude was apologizing to the young boy at that moment. The walk to the testing hall felt more magical by the second for the kid. After a few minutes, they reach a tech panel. This gadget starts doing a quick scan of both of them. Meanwhile, the branch manager is busy talking business and lighting up his cigar. Finally, after a few seconds of scanning, the young guys finish the process, and just like that, gate swings open, letting them through. When the kid sees the place, his eyes go wide, totally amazed. There was a ton of high-tech gear everywhere. He had a million questions for his guide, but before he could ask anything, the dude had a mission for him. He needed to put on the special tester suit. Li Yuxin was told to chill in a main room after getting suited up, while the old man checked the gear. The kid stared at the suit, totally blown away by what he saw. Without thinking twice, he stripped off his clothes and tossed his backpack on the floor. After slipping into the suit, he started zipping up all the zippers. Finally, he reached the body adjustment zipper. Once he was all suited up, he had the biggest grin on his face. His excitement was off the charts. He felt like the coolest kid on the planet in that suit. Then he dashed for the main room. Soon, the presence sensor door started to open, letting him through. When the gate fully opened, a bright light flooded in. The kid had no clue what that intense light was. After a few seconds with his eyes shut, he slowly opened them. Then Li Yuxin spotted a girl in a matching suit. She totally caught his eye. Her blue eyes and golden hair blew his mind. He was staring at her like she was some kind of magic. He thought she was just another version of manager Li Hyungyu. The girl looked a bit confused by that. Li Yuxin then starts complimenting this new version of the manager's operator, pointing out a cool feature. Those golden locks smell like a sweet shampoo commercial. Suddenly, the old man pops up out of nowhere, saying Miss Maria just washed her hair. That's why it smelled so good. Realizing she wasn't just a different operator, the kid felt super embarrassed. The girl quickly shoved him away, roasting his ugly face. She even threw out some threats, but she looked like she couldn't hurt a fly. Without missing a beat, Li Yuxin apologized and stepped back. Then he tripped over a machine that was just chilling there. With that, the clumsy kid fell onto a capsule-looking device. The machine started doing a user check and kicked off a revitalization process. Freaking out, the kid started yelling for manager Lee. Maria, watching this train wreck, thought the kid was a total idiot. Hearing her roast made him feel a bit embarrassed. The old man apologized to Maria, explaining that due to some tech issues, they had to merge the online reality server with the simulator. When she heard this, the girl got furious, not accepting that Li Yuxin was just a regular user. Meanwhile, the kid was pretty annoyed by the nicknames she threw at him. She was totally not vibing with the manager's idea of bringing a civilian into the training simulator, worried that the higher-ups would catch wind of it. Once again, the old dude apologizes and explains that after the last incident, if the online reality hadn't merged, the simulator would probably be toast. The boy was itching to kick things off since they were diving into some seriously confusing stuff. While messing around with the machine, he felt the absence of a user manual hit hard. After fiddling a bit more, he got a little freaked out. Li Yushin realized there was no instruction manual for the game on the main screen. Meanwhile, the girl was getting even more heated with the old man after finding out about the mission she had to tackle. But he got the whole picture and decided to give her full access to the training simulator. When she heard this, the girl chilled out a bit. Li Yushin, at that moment, was just watching the argument, totally lost. The old man then asks if there would be any issue with canceling that. The girl, hearing this, grinds her teeth in frustration. She then snatches her helmet, filled with rage, and warns the man not to even think about ending that, or she'd make sure he regretted it. After all this, the man thanks Miss Maria for her kindness. She, in turn, just gives him the finger. Then Maria lowers the visor of her helmet and hops into a machine just like the one Li Yushin was in. The old man quickly says they'd figure out the controls as they went and that the boy should get ready. Without missing a beat, Li lifts his helmet to give a thumbs up to the man and settles back into the capsule, waiting for the game to kick off. Then finally, the old man announces he's about to start the server. Besides the gray-haired dude, there were a bunch of other people grinding away in that same setup. The guys were glued to their computers, looking super serious. And after a ton of chatter and debates, the players' capsules seal up. One of the operators then yells, saying he's activated the Terra injection. Another chimes in, saying he's checking the assimilation rate. Meanwhile, Li was inside his capsule, feeling pretty jittery. The boy felt this crazy heat building up, which seemed to spike as time went on. Then the manager tells him that the energy from the exchange between the program and his body would fade soon. Suddenly, one of the operators yells, saying the assimilation rate shot past 70%. In a flash, the percentage jumped to 80. When it hit 90, the two testers were already geared up for their mission. Finally, when the assimilation rate hit 100%, the manager calls for the game to start. Then, the countdown kicks off. The machine studied the players' bodies, which at the end of the countdown confirmed the process was complete. Li Yushin, at that moment, was chill and had his eyes closed, just like Maria, who was ready to back him up on this mission. Finally, the virtual reality simulator powers up, and soon it reflects on the boy's state, who starts to teleport. The same goes for the blonde, who was already used to all this. The manager then wishes them a wild journey filled with epic experiences. Li Yushin hears a weird sound and a familiar feeling and instantly knows what was bugging him. It was rain dripping on his face. That sensation was so real it barely felt like virtual reality. Even the drops of water were cold and totally felt legit. He remembered lying in the capsule and couldn't figure out why he felt so chilly. Plus, he was decked out in some strange armor that came with a cape, just like a superhero's. After taking it all in, the boy was shocked to realize where he was. He was standing on ground he'd never seen before and already knew where he was. He found himself in a massive castle. Suddenly, a soldier tells the general that enemy troops had rolled up on the plains. Hearing this, Li freaks out, thinking he was just in a tutorial. Out of nowhere, a man approaches him, calling him general and saying that standing around would make the other soldiers antsy. He wanted Li to give orders to the whole platoon, but the boy felt totally lost in all of that. At that moment, all the soldiers were staring at him with eager faces. Soon Li realizes that his armor belonged to a commander-type character. Then he asked the man if those were really the plains, because there was only an ocean surrounding the entire castle. The man then says that even God would wish it were just black water. Li Yushin is even more shocked to learn that it wasn't a real sea. The boy's confusion was about what the man was saying at that moment, since there was no ocean there. Then the boy's eyes widen, and he finally realizes that this ocean was actually a sea of enemies. Meanwhile, the opponents were creeping closer to the castle. Some of them were already set up at the front lines, and were getting their bows and arrows ready for a potential attack. Everyone was hyped for the battle to kick off. Meanwhile, the goofy leader wondered if that number even made sense. The gray-haired dude then tells him this isn't the time to freak out, but orders should be given to the platoon ASAP. Even with this advice, the boy was more confused than a cat at a dog show, yelling at a random NPC. He was searching for a control box or status window in the chaos. Meanwhile, the enemy soldiers were gearing up to start the battle, and were already prepping their shields. Seeing this, one of the allies shouts that the enemies have locked in their offensive formation. This makes the old man even angrier, yelling at the general. Li Yushin was desperate, feeling lost without at least an instruction manual. As time ticked by, the old man got even tenser. Then he decided he couldn't just chill while the enemies attacked first. Soon he ordered the soldiers to form a battle line, and the archers should get ready to shoot. With that, all the soldiers jumped into action, and the NPC finally shouted for everyone to fight to the death. This got all the soldiers pumped, eager to throw down. Meanwhile, Li was just watching everything unfold without a peep. With that, the old man gave the green light for his soldiers to fire. They immediately jumped into action after the go-ahead, and soon launched a storm of arrows toward the enemies. They flew at an insane speed. After a few seconds in the air, they started to drop. Those sharp weapons were dangerously heading towards the ground. With that, they did their job, hitting the enemies hard. The countless arrows fell right on the opposing soldiers, many of them groaned in pain as those sharp tips found their mark. With this first attack, several enemies were successfully taken out. But this sparked outrage among their buddies, who quickly aimed their weapons at the castle. At that moment, a massive counterattack was aimed at the protagonist's platoon. After a few seconds of prep, the enemies launched their arrows. There were so many sharp weapons slicing through the sky that it looked like black rain. They were heading towards the castle at a deadly speed. Realizing the danger they were in, the old man's eyes went wide, and he immediately shouted for his soldiers to raise their shields. Without a second thought, they obeyed their supposed leader. The arrows then began to rain down uncontrollably everywhere. Various parts of the castle were hit by the enemy's counterattack. Many windows and doors shattered from the arrows flying wildly. But on the flip side, many also hit their intended targets. The rain of arrows from the counterattack also struck several soldiers from the protagonist's team. Seeing that they had successfully attacked, the team commander ordered his platoon to charge towards the castle. With that, the sea of enemies started sprinting towards the building. The grandeur of that wall seemed tiny compared to the number of people ready to attack it. The soldiers then began to use the tricks planned for the assault. They carried tall ladders to jump over the castle wall more easily. Those climbing also had swords for a possible battle after crossing the wall. All the soldiers advanced at lightning speed. Finally, the ladders were set up in the right spots and the ascent began. At the end of the ladder, the soldiers used other means to climb. They all also had ropes to make the mission easier. Almost reaching the top of the wall, the soldier spotted something that freaked him out. The castle defenders were hurling boulders from the highest point. The heavy stones fell from above like an atomic bomb and smashed into the climbers with crazy force. All of this was commanded by the gray-haired old man, who wasn't about to let the soldiers invade the castle. After hearing more orders, the soldiers worked tirelessly with the stones. Several of them were thrown, hitting the climbers and their ladders squarely. The guys who were almost jumping over the wall were stopped by spears. The spears had such insane sharpness that they pierced the invaders' armor. Many of them screamed in pain as it pierced their bodies. One of the guys gets hit in the chest by the spear. The soldier coming behind him doesn't even care about his buddy's injury and uses his body to push himself up and keep climbing. Meanwhile, the castle's defenders kept using their spears. Realizing that the enemy wouldn't be stopped by his friend's body, one of the soldiers screams in desperation. But it was already too late. The invader reached the highest point and smacked him right in the face. Not even the helmet could block that epic hit, and the brave soldier crashed to the ground, seriously hurt. Only the tears streaming down his face could show how much it hurt. Meanwhile, Li Yushin was watching all this, wondering if this was really just a game. It felt so real that he couldn't even react. It was way too close to reality, and Li couldn't tell if it was real or fake. The online world was turning out to be super scary. Still on the field, a bunch of soldiers were firing bows and arrows. They aimed right at the top of the castle where the defenders were. One arrow, launched by a soldier, went totally off course. It zipped over the whole platoon without breaking a sweat. Even a wall couldn't stop it. Finally, the arrow flew over the castle wall, where Li was trying to escape the chaos. But out of nowhere, he gets hit and spills a good amount of vital red liquid. That arrow just grazed his face. And of course, it ended up sticking in the neck of some poor soldier. After getting hit, Li instinctively shuts his eyes. Realizing his hand was covered in vital red liquid from his face, he freaked out. He couldn't wrap his head around why it hurt so much, since it was just a simulation. While trying to figure out if that pain was real or not, the gray-haired man looked at him with worry. The man then yelled for all the soldiers to protect the general. They jumped into action and quickly formed a massive shield wall over Li Yushin. After that, arrows started raining down from the castle sky. They began to fall point first right on everyone. Looking up and realizing this, with his face spilling red liquid, Li panicked. The soldiers quickly huddled their shields as tight as they could. Then the arrows started falling from the sky like raindrops. As they hit the shields, the general got even more scared. After a few seconds, all the arrows finally stopped falling. Li thought this whole situation must be a game glitch. He still couldn't find the control window. He couldn't believe the mess he had gotten himself into. He was totally trapped in that chaotic place. Once the attack stopped, the redhead quickly ordered the archers to regroup. After everyone left, only Li was left kneeling on the ground. He was super scared and covered his ears with his hands. Then, someone came up to him. It was the gray-haired man, grabbing him and asking how long he would stay like this. The guy didn't get why the leader wasn't giving orders in a situation like this, but the boy just looked at him, totally confused. He just wanted an escape button to end all this madness. Suddenly, Li Yushin started crying, begging to leave the game. He didn't want to be there for another second. The old man stared at him with a scary expression, and then started shaking him, not getting a word of what he was saying. A little way from the castle, someone was watching the war unfold. He was hiding behind a bunch of invading soldiers and thought it was all a total snooze fest. Then, out of loyalty to the boy's dad, he decided to jump into the action. The man moved quickly, wielding a massive axe, and this weapon cleared a path through the soldiers. He swung it so much that only traces of destruction were left behind. He took down all the soldiers in front of him without breaking a sweat. Meanwhile, the invaders kept trying to climb the castle stairs. A little further back, his friends were brutally taken out by the axe guy. The protective soldiers watched everything from the top of the castle, totally stunned. Finally, after a few minutes of clearing the way, the guy put his axe down. The gray-haired man and the protagonist stared at all this with wide eyes. Countless soldiers lay lifeless on the ground, and the axe was stuck in the bricks of the wall. Bits of armor were scattered everywhere. Many of them were falling from the top of the castle, and the one-eyed man kept advancing like a total legend. After a few minutes of walking, he managed to grab his axe back. Seeing the sheer power of the man, the protective soldiers were completely terrified. Meanwhile, the giant was gearing up to drop another blow that would wipe out a bunch of people. Taking a closer look, Lee Yushin realized he recognized that silhouette. Then it hit him, that dude. He was the infamous Black One. This villain was taking out soldiers like it was a game of dodgeball. Those who were left tried to bolt from the monster in pure panic, but the gray-haired man was trying to hold them back because if they ran, it would be a total massacre. Sadly, either way, lives were being lost left and right. Black One charged at the soldiers with zero mercy or pity. When the gray-haired man saw the monster coming, he freaked out. But it was already too late. The giant was relentless. Even though everyone was ready to throw down, they couldn't stop him. He wiped out the entire battalion without a second thought. The soldiers were taken out brutally, screaming for their lives. Many got tossed aside like ragdolls after getting smashed. The old gray-haired man just stood there looking completely defeated. All of his soldiers were horrifically taken out, necks snapped. Only bits of armor and broken swords were left scattered around. The only one left standing after that endless slaughter was Lee Yushin. Black One then asked why he was hiding behind all that armor with no one inside. The guy also said that the boy's dad was way weaker than him. The dude had played with fire so much that he got burned by the giant. Suddenly, Black One started swinging his sword. Lee Yushin watched, heart racing for his life. The guy then moved closer, reminding him of how his dad had gone down. Lee, in that moment, thought about his own end. He also wondered if the game would end if Black One took him out. The giant questioned why the boy wasn't picking up a sword to fight back. He seemed a bit confused when he heard the boy's voice. Lee thought he had already kicked the bucket moments ago. Then he spotted the weapon lying on the ground. The long sword was just waiting to be picked up to take on the enemy. Black One then said it would be a shame to finish off a kid who wasn't even armed. He wanted Lee Yushin to die as a worthy heir to his dad's vital red juice. Lee listened, staring at the guy, and wondering what was wrong with him. Lee Yushin didn't even know who that dude was. Then he decided to grab the sword stuck in the ground. The boy was furious that the guy was talking about his dad without even knowing him. As Black One was a villain, his only goal was to take out the boy, not to chat nonsense. Lee Yushin quickly told the guy to shut it, since he knew nothing about his awesome dad. Then the boy felt a surge of anger mixed with the courage to face the monster. It was the first time he wasn't scared since he got there. Plus, that monster had wiped out the whole army with just a few hits. After seeing the boy pick up the sword, the guy was pumped and celebrated. With that, the battle would be way more fun, according to him. Lee Yushin soon realized he had no choice but to fight Black One. The man was already gearing up to deliver a killer blow to the kid. The boy screamed in desperation watching that. In the heat of battle, he noticed something that scared him even more. Lee had just lost grip of his sword. Because it was way too heavy for his weak arms, the weapon stayed there stuck in the ground, motionless. Then the end of the line came for the protagonist. As he swung for the final blow, his enemy mocked him, calling him a clown. Then finally, the boy snapped back to reality and the manager announced the end of the test. Everyone watched the protagonist despair on a massive screen. One of the operators then confirmed that the total game time had been 6 minutes, 1 second, and 33 milliseconds. Upon hearing this, the manager asked about the assimilation rate of the test subject. Meanwhile, Lee Yushin was still stuck inside the augmented reality capsule. He was trapped and his body was shaking, trying to break free. His teeth were grinding from all the anxiety he felt. The operator then replied to the old man, saying that the assimilation rate hit 100%, and that the last test subject was probably feeling some serious death pain. With that, the man concluded that leaving him in a vegetative state would be enough for that day. He then ordered his crew to upload the recording to report to the branch manager. The system should also be rebooted by them ASAP. This dude wanted the test subjects to experience what the virtual reality simulator called Hell was all about. Meanwhile, at Lee Yushin's crib, his mom was calling him for dinner, cause she whipped up his fave soybean stew. She thought the kid would just bounce to the gym without even tasting the food. And his dad was on his case, thinking he pulled another all-nighter gaming. While his mom tried to defend him, he seemed to snap back to reality. That was the chair he always plopped down in for meals. And that was definitely the smell of his mom's cooking. The aroma was totally coming from the soybean stew she made with love. As the boy checked in with reality, his dad kept teasing him, cracking jokes that made his mom even more annoyed. It looked like Lee had really come back to the normal chaos of his life. When he finally went for that first spoonful of stew, a drop unexpectedly splattered on the utensil. Lee Yushin jumped, eyes wide open. Inside his house, it felt like it was raining out of nowhere. His parents, noticing the water dripping from the ceiling, freaked out, clueless about what was happening. Lee, for his part, was in total disbelief at what he was seeing. Suddenly, everyone was outside the house. From that sky, a massive storm was unleashing chaos. Regretting everything, Lee Yushin yelled that this was so not cool. All of this felt like some wild illusion or a crazy dream. In just a blink, he found himself back in armor, totally shocked by what was going down. Meanwhile, soldiers were battling around him like it was a video game gone wrong. Lee looked around, his expression a mix of fear and confusion. Soon he realized everything was back to how it had been before. He had been yanked back into that hellish reality, and he was seriously bummed, pounding his fists against the ground in frustration. Super annoyed, he couldn't believe this was happening and shouted that he couldn't finish the mission. Suddenly, a bunch of arrows started raining down from the sky again. One of his soldiers tried to warn him about the incoming danger. Without reacting, Lee Yushin just stood there, watching the sharp weapons zooming closer. They sliced through the air at a crazy speed, and they were about to hit him in just a few seconds. Realizing this, the soldier bolted toward the general. Without a second thought, he swung his sword to deflect the arrows coming down. But one slipped past his defense, and it nicked him on the helmet. This sent a piece of armor flying off. When Lee realized who was behind those outfits, his eyes went wide. The person had huge black hair. Turns out, the so-called soldier was a brave guerrilla girl. The girl then approached the protagonist, who was lying there like a potato. Then the boy asked where she had popped up from. The girl looked to be around his age. The savior locked eyes with him, her expression a mix of worry and determination. Lee quickly figured she probably had something important to say. She then dropped the bomb that she didn't want to say anything other than a seriously disturbing piece of news. It was that the axe monster would be back soon. Hearing this, Yushin went into shock, totally frozen. Suddenly, he started shouting for the team leader to shut down that game right now. He wanted all of this to end ASAP. Then the gray-haired dude interrupted him, asking for calm, cause orders needed to be given to keep the soldiers from freaking out. That general was the son of the former leader, and the gray-haired guy thought the frail boy could actually take down Blackwin. But Lee Yushin just kept being scared out of his mind. Meanwhile, all the soldiers showed they believed in the boy's victory. Then he started shouting that it was impossible for an ordinary student to fight solo against a monster like that. Lee Yushin wasn't even the real general of that squad and just wanted to escape that cursed game as fast as possible. After hearing the boy's words, the whole platoon was stunned. Then the girl with the long hair stepped up. She walked toward the boy, standing face to face with him. As all of this felt like a game to the general, she decided to drop some truth on him. The girl quickly said that everything was pure reality and not a game, and that for everyone to survive, they had to fight bravely without backing down. Upon hearing this, the boy renounced everything in his head, remembering the face of that merciless enemy. That dude had taken out countless soldiers without a second thought. Meanwhile, the masterminds behind this whole mess were enjoying a juicy steak for dinner. The man thanked the team leader, Lee Hyun-yu, for his work that would get them back to New York in no time. The old man was totally vibing with the branch manager's compliments, who had another mission lined up for him. This task was all about the sassy little girl named Maria. Already catching on to the game, the old man said they were just waiting for her to crash before kicking things off. At that moment, she was chilling in one of those augmented reality capsules. Next to her was Lee Yushin, who was on another device, totally in the zone. The simulation would wrap up as soon as the boy lost his hype, but the old man was sweating bullets about Maria waking up, cause managing both at once would be a total nightmare. The simulator acting up was definitely a bummer, but the old man wasn't about to let that tiny chance ruin the epic finale and gave the branch manager a thumbs up. The big guy thought about the odds of that happening and dropped an example of what would totally wreck the end of the tests. This chance was all about Lee Yushin's simulation. Cause if he took down the infamous Blackwin, it would probably mess up the whole augmented reality game tests. And right then, the two were deep in the game. Out of nowhere, the team leader got a call from someone. This instantly grabbed his attention. It was the main character, who was totally aware of all the spying, begging for his basic skills and sword skills to be cranked up. Meanwhile, the branch manager was just watching the boys panic without a care in the world. Lee Hyun-yu then chimed in about the chance of plans going south, and said the odds were practically zero given the boys' situation. Trapped in his capsule, he screamed as he saw Blackwin closing in. His eyes were wide with a look of pure desperation at the big guy. Then, out of nowhere, Blackwin attacked, wiping out the protagonist. He screamed in agony, feeling every bit of the pain. Seeing that, the leader asked the manager if he had any intel about the kind of immortality Blackwin had. Even if his DNA got wrecked, it wouldn't change a thing. The fact that he was a walking disaster wouldn't budge either. After getting wrecked again by the monster, Lee Yushin looked up at the sky, totally defeated. After that convo and watching the boy crash, the branch manager realized he had stressed for nothing and went back to munching with his buddy. The old man just cackled at the whole scene, while the simulator flashed the end of the second operation. Suddenly, the info panel lit up, signaling another simulation was kicking off. The protagonist was totally confused, wondering how many times this had already happened. He thought about facing death over and over, and that was his whole vibe at that moment. At first, he was hit with fear and ended up losing his lunch. Lee begged for anyone to save him. He pleaded for his life while desperately asking why this was happening to him. He had done some messed up stuff and acted cowardly and foolish, but no matter what, he kept trying to rise above it. He faced Blackwin multiple times, already knowing how it would end. He was in a seriously shaky mental state. His opponent tortured him, saying his dad wasn't that weak, cause the man fought with way more fire. Lee Yushin couldn't dodge Blackwind at any moment, not even his first self, who got wrecked without the villain even breaking a sweat, along with his second and third selves, and all the others he had already lost count. They couldn't beat the enemy and ended up biting the dust anyway, and they heard Blackwind say he was disappointed with their performance. Lee couldn't take it anymore, hearing the dude talk about his dad with every reincarnation. He thought Blackwind was just some NPC in a game. He also remembered the girl who talked to him in one of the first lives. Lee didn't believe this was real life. His real life used to be hitting up the internet cafe to game with his friends after school, and having dinner with his fam every night. Nothing about that resembled the hellish war he was stuck in. He tried every time to take down Blackwind, remembering the wild persuasion from those crazies who tricked him with the project. Lee Yushin charged at the big guy as if he had some insane powers. He tried to swing his sword with all the determination in the world. That would catch Blackwind off guard and land a killer blow. But suddenly, he was shocked to see the enemy looking surprised. Blackwind, in a split second, spun around and dodged the boy's attack. After taking the enemy's hit, Lee crashed to the ground, totally wiped out. Once again, the big guy brought up his dad for no reason, and said that when he mentioned the boy's tutor, he got even more fired up. Everything seemed lost for the boy, who, lying down, could only stare at the sky. Then he starts to get up, saying he gets it now. With that, he throws down a challenge to Blackwind, saying he'd never back down again. No matter how many times he ripped out his eyeballs or tore him apart, Lee wouldn't flinch or run away. After reviving so many times, the boy figured he could take down his enemy, and that was all he had left at that moment. When confronted like that, Blackwind starts to glare at the boy, and then delivers another hit to the protagonist, finishing him off again. With that, the boy vanishes from the scene and everything resets like some wild magic trick. Then the info panel pops up saying the 31st simulation was about to kick off. After so many tries, Lee Yushin realizes there's only one way to survive, and that's to fight back with everything on the line. Suddenly, someone rolls up, handing him a weapon. It was the girl, saying he didn't even compare to the enemy, even when he fought back, and that stung. But even feeling all that pain, he didn't hesitate to keep going. The protagonist soaked in all the girl's words, who looked at him with a face full of determination, not even thinking about giving up. At that moment, Lee Yushin had his eyes shut. When he opened them, he saw something desperate. It was a bunch of sharp arrows flying right at him. But once again, the girl saves him, smashing all of them with her sword. The boy seemed totally unfazed by these same old situations. Then the girl makes a call, thinking the general would fight. She wanted to lead and defend while he did that. Pretending to care about this info, Lee nods along, but he remembered the dude who had tricked him, so he decided not to trust anyone else. After all, he had no choice but to fight until he could take down his enemy. Finally, the gray-haired old man shouts that the general had finally given the order. All troops should gear up for battle. Without a second thought, all the squads take up a guard position. Meanwhile, the enemies charged through the castle like they were on a mission. The battle was super bloody for both sides, but no one backed down defending their squads. Lee Yushin, for his part, gripped his sword tight, waiting for his biggest enemy. He was over this battlefield, but he finally got used to it and wasn't going down. Suddenly, the girl shows up, highlighting the general's wish. She could teach him how to do what he wanted. He'd learned the basics of hand-to-hand combat to use against Blackwind. Then the girl starts showing him the first step. She wielded her sword like a pro, and charged at the enemies without a second thought. She took down the foes with her slick moves. The girl held her sword with insane strength and determination, and kept using her weapon to wipe out all the enemies. She charged at dozens of opponents without a hint of fear. Her focus was clear in her eyes. While she practiced the most flawless fencing, Lee Yushin watched, eyes wide, totally impressed. The girl had taken down practically an entire squad all by herself, barely breaking a sweat. According to her, even at his limit, the boy should keep his sword raised until the end. After seeing those perfect fighting moves, the protagonist realized the girl's strength. Suddenly, the gray-haired man shouts about the battle starting and that everyone should fight until their last breath. Hearing those commands, the soldiers shout with bravery. In just a few seconds, the war kicks off between hundreds of men. A little distance away, Lee Yushin watched everything unfold. Suddenly, an enemy pops out from the crowd, aiming to take him down. Without hesitation, the protagonist bravely swings his sword to face this foe. With that, he blocks the man's attack, but then hesitates to finish him off after the block. Meanwhile, the girl was slicing through the crowd. She didn't hesitate while swinging her sword, and all the enemies that crossed her path were wiped out without mercy. After a lot of effort, Lee Yushin finally knocks his opponent to the ground. He then realizes that if he wanted to survive, he needed to take that enemy out. That man looked at him with a terrified expression, almost begging for his life. Then suddenly, one of his allies rushes in, trying to stop the protagonist. But it was already too late, as Lee had made up his mind that if he didn't kill the enemy, he'd be the one getting killed. With that, he finally drives his sword into the opponent's body. He thrusts that sharp blade into the man brutally. The opponent screamed in intense pain from that fatal blow. Suddenly, Lee feels something jab into his body. That man, even wounded, had managed to hit him back. Then the boy realizes how tough it is to take down a human being. Not even his armor could block that sword. After finally finishing off the enemy, Lee yanks that blade from his body. He's seriously worried about whether he'll make it out alive after this. Then the girl shows up with her sword raised. Lee Yushin instantly clocks her presence. His eyes go wide when he sees the danger she's in right then. An enemy was creeping up on her, ready to cause some chaos. Sadly, the dude gets exactly what he wanted. As she starts to disintegrate, she gives her last words to Lee Yushin, telling him to never lose hope of getting home. Then she begins to fade from the simulation. She had also taken a bunch of arrows in her back. Watching that, Lee's face twists into pure rage after hearing the girl's last words. The boy gets furious, since she was just an NPC made by Lee Hyun-yu and barely knew what home really meant. She acted all wise but didn't get why Yushin was even fighting. She listened to all his reasons while staring into his eyes. Then Lee realizes something's off in that gaze. The girl even tries to say something to her general, but she can't, as she starts to get kicked out of the augmented reality. This was happening because of the fatal arrows she took in her back. Lee Yushin, for his part, watched that with total despair in his eyes, and he kept thinking about what she wanted to say before getting sneak attacked. The protagonist was completely outraged for not hearing her out fully. After all that despair, he grips his sword tight in his hands and decides he's going to fight until he can't anymore. He'd follow the girl's advice to keep swinging his weapon during the battle, because that way he probably wouldn't lose it. Lee Yushin just needed to take down one person, but first he had to face an entire army. He didn't need to wipe out everyone. Lee just wanted his main target, which was Blackwin. If he took out that enemy, he'd be way closer to going home. But the battle was super tough, and Lee wished he had more strength. Then the opposing squad noticed his weakness and charged at him. In just a few seconds, a bunch of enemies were on him. Several swords stabbed into his body and seriously hurt him. The pain was so intense that Lee spat out vital red liquid. With this defeat, the panel kicks off the 33rd simulation. Up to that point, Yushin was still feeling the pain from those hits, but suddenly he widens his eyes and stops feeling that sensation. Then once again, the protagonist goes back to the start for another shot. He's born in the simulation pretty angry, cursing his enemies. He charges at those guys without mercy, taking down everyone in his way. And not satisfied, he goes after more foes to eliminate. With that, some unlucky ones who dared to stand in his path end up getting wrecked. Lee Yushin finished them off with crazy ease. This time he took out 3 guys without breaking a sweat. Nothing could stop the boy who was hyped to get home. Each finish was celebrated by him like a champ. With every failed attempt, the simulation reset again. With that, Lee had even more chances to master his weapon. He spilled vital red liquid from the enemies as part of his training. Their body parts flew through the air from there. Lee Yushin's expression at that moment was pure rage. He only thought about taking down more and more people every second. Anyone who crossed his path ended up getting sliced. Lee strictly followed all the tips from the warrior girl, including the one to always keep his weapon raised. He was definitely getting the hang of it. His sword didn't feel as heavy as before. It sliced through the air with crazy ease and also took down enemies without much effort. The protagonist loved the thrill of defeating his opponents more and more. After fighting hard, he stops to catch his breath. He seemed to have taken down about 5 or 6 enemies in just a few minutes. As the rounds went on, his strength and energy grew, and luckily these stats didn't reset after the round ended. This was definitely great for his evolution, but still he didn't feel happy about it all. While the kid was lost in thought, the warrior called him. Then Yushin realizes the likely reason for his unhappiness. Everything seemed to be because of that girl. As usual, she tried to say something to him. But suddenly, a bunch of arrows started flying. And guess what? The cycle just keeps repeating itself. Lee watched the girl on the ground, wishing she hadn't been picked for that cursed test. Her face was a total downer, no doubt about it. To Lee Yushin, she was just a ghost conjured by this messed up place, but he couldn't shake off why it hit him so hard. Once again, the info panel popped up, kicking off the 65th simulation. Already leveling up, the dude counted his victims. 9 enemies? Paft, that was child's play. He took out about 10 opponents in no time, barely breaking a sweat. All this while, Yushin thought he was a lucky dude, finishing some off with his rookie sword skills. A bunch of enemies charged at him, ready to mess him up, but the protagonist stood tall, looking brave as ever. As he ripped off his cloak, he had a thought about the whole situation. Quickly, he managed to wound one of his foes before the others showed up. Then he tossed his cloak over the injured guy. With that, a flurry of arrows hit it right on and pierced his skin like it was made of paper. Even the pendant from his cloak went flying from the impact. Turns out some arrows from his own squad hit him in the back. Seeing he did the right thing, Lee Yushin flashed a wicked little grin. With that, he gripped his sword tight. This left his enemies wide-eyed and panicking. Then the protagonist charged at that whole squad. The soldiers tried to stab him with sharp harpoons, but he was too quick. Luckily, Lee dodged an attack that would have been game over with that weapon. Then he snatched it from the enemy's hands. With that, he lifted the opponent using the harpoon shaft. The enemy screamed in desperation as he flew through the air. Then Lee slammed him down hard. But just when the boy was about to finish his opponent, someone snuck up from behind. It was another enemy swinging a massive sword, ready to take him out to save his buddy. Luckily, Yushin caught on just in time before a fatal hit. Then he wrapped up what he was doing and tossed pieces of the dude at the other enemy. With that, another foe charged at the protagonist. And without breaking a sweat, the boy took him out with the sharp harpoon. One last enemy was about to get finished off with the tip of the sword right in his face, but Li Yushin unusually paused to catch his breath. The adversary, meanwhile, was screaming for his life. Then the protagonist noticed something cool while prepping his sword to finish off the enemy. He was definitely getting stronger and stronger. Even after taking down that squad, another group came at lead for round 2. There was still one more thing he noticed. Even though his body was pretty banged up from the cuts and his red vital juice was leaking from his mouth, he still hadn't kicked the bucket. But there was a catch to all this. It seemed that only Li Yushin was left standing. Not even the old dude who loved to shout was around making noise. Not even that annoying knight with the red hair had survived. No allies in sight. They could be dead or just bailed, leaving the protagonist solo, but he didn't care. Because from the jump, this fight was his with a strong urge to get home. Then an enemy with a massive weapon approached the boy. Li glared at him with a seriously angry face. The adversary, seeing just a kid in front of him, was grinning like he just won the lottery. Then he grabbed something and tossed it at the protagonist. It looked like a piece of someone's body flying through the air. Then it landed right in front of Li Yushin. He quickly leaned in to check it out, trying to figure out what it was. When he turned, he realized it was the hair of the fallen gorilla girl. Yushin's eyes went wide, not believing this level of cruelty. All the other soldiers seemed to take pride in that moment. They showed zero respect for a girl in battle. Li Yushin had no doubt he was alone in this fight, but he realized that girl had just been there a second ago, and he had no clue what she was thinking. So suddenly, the other enemies started launching more weapons at the protagonist. Unfortunately, some ended up hitting him hard. With that, the info panel popped up again, kicking off the 67 simulation. Li immediately asked the girl why she was smiling like that. He didn't get why she was smiling at that moment, but she seemed totally clueless about what the boy was talking about. Suddenly, an enemy showed up, trying to hit the girl. Li Yushin was already peeping at everything, knowing how it would all go down. The girl was leaking a ton of vital liquid from her wounds. Then Yushin drops the bomb about the moment she had doubts about until now. He says that a warrior always smiles before kicking the bucket, and again asks why she does that every single time. He also didn't get why she always had his back instead of bailing, leaving him worried even though it was all just a wild illusion. Yushin wouldn't treat her any different just for sticking by him. After hearing all that, the girl just looks confused, like she's trying to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded. Then the dude gets stressed with that awkward silence, demanding an answer. Suddenly, his eyes go wide, realizing danger is creeping up. The girl then snatches her shield in a flash, and without a second thought, rushes to protect her general. She slams the shield in front of Li Yushin, ready to take the hit. The two brace themselves for the incoming attacks. In a split second, arrows start raining down the shield. Even so, Yushin is focused on the girl under his protection. She's holding that shield with all the determination in the world, while arrows are falling like it's a bad weather day. The boy can't help but ask if she has anything to say. The girl, though, just stays silent with a wrecked expression. Then she ends up fainting in Li Yushin's arms, still clutching the shield. Stuck in that endless loop of deaths, the boy realizes he's got no allies in this cursed place, and that trusting anyone, there's a big no-no. But still, there's a twist in all this. The woman who helped him seemed way different from the rest. With each cycle, she moved in a unique way, like she didn't belong in this world. And Yushin had no clue why she was the only one doing that. Again, she calls out for her general. Everything plays out just like before. In a few seconds, another storm of arrows comes flying, and she hits the ground, wounded, calling for her general, trying to say something. This revelation always left Yushin super curious. No matter how many times he asked or yelled at her, he never got a reply. So, from then on, Yushin had to switch up his game plan. At that moment, a shower of sharp arrows fell from the sky. The boy stood there, watching the kneeling figure. After a few moments, the info panel pops up, signaling the start of Simulation 137. At that moment, the gray-haired old dude shouts to the general, saying the enemy army is moving toward the plains. But Yushin seemed to not care about anything going on. He didn't give a hoot about that cowardly army. They were just staring at him with dumb looks. Li honestly didn't give a damn about those walking trash bags. The only thing he cared about was right in front of him. He walked up to her with a totally admiring look. He locked eyes with her, like she was the only thing that mattered. Suddenly, he shouts to everyone that he's going to be on the front line during the enemy attack. The gray-haired dude, hearing this from the general, freaks out. The reaction of the red-haired boy isn't much different. Even a girl tries to change Yushin's mind. But he, at that moment, wouldn't take questions from anyone. With that, the girl pouts and just goes with it. She looked worried while the boy declared he'd be on the front line no matter what went down. His expression really showed a tense and worrying vibe. Then finally, Yushin gives the command for the army to move out, ready to fight to the end now. Soon and without hesitation, the gray-haired man signals for everyone to follow the general. All the troops, without thinking twice, start escorting the boy. Meanwhile, the enemies charged with blood in their eyes. At first, they began using their ladders to scale the castle. The first guys started climbing, weapons ready for battle. The ascent happened fast and super organized. In a few seconds, several men were already at the top of the castle. As usual, stones were hurled to knock them down, blocking the climb. Everything went down just like the first and last times. The enemy army advanced across the plains, totally pumped. Yushin was completely sure he'd finally stopped them all this time. Already at the front line, he faced a ton of enemies. At that moment, he thought about achieving what he wanted, finally hearing what that woman had to say and uncovering her true identity. This way, he'd finally break this cursed cycle. Yushin was totally convinced he'd come out alive from this mess. As usual, the war kicked off and the Allied soldiers were super nervous. Then, the girl gorilla also took the front line. Meanwhile, Yushin was already fighting non-stop, and with the girl's help, he took down a bunch of enemies. He was itching to find out who that woman really was. But first, he had to make it through this chaos. Finally, the cowardly allies decided to charge at the enemies, but they all ended up getting wrecked without even trying to fight back. They were seriously just a bunch of scaredy cats with zero guts. Some others even bolted, tails tucked between their legs. But Yushin didn't care and didn't want any help from those traitors. Glancing over, he noticed something super concerning. It was the girl fighting bravely, but putting herself in major danger. At that moment, she was about to get hit by a fatal axe swing. Without a second thought, Yushin jumped in to save her. And lucky for him, he shot an arrow that nailed the enemy, stopping them cold. All of that was done with mad skill by the boy. That was the moment he had been waiting for. The girl's assassin had gone to a better place. She, on the other hand, took a breather after all that craziness. They were at a crossroads, the last two standing on the wild battlefield. Then Yushin slowly walked over to the girl. Getting close, he opened his arms, ready to protect her. In that stance, he waited for something he knew was coming. Kneeling on the ground, she looked at him, totally confused. Soon, she questioned what he was doing. But he already knew that in a few seconds, arrows would start raining down. She always died, and Yushin never got to hear her last words. But this time would be different, as he was taking the arrows for her right then. The young woman didn't get it and watched in despair. Yushin even gritted his teeth from the pain of the arrows. This time would be different. He wouldn't let her die in front of him. He kept asking for the girl's true identity and what her last words were. Meanwhile, the deadliest arrows began to fall from the sky towards them. Yushin really wanted to know who that woman was, but she just stared at him in silence, saying nothing. Meanwhile, the boy tried to shield her from the attacks with his own body. Suddenly, the girl reached her hand toward Li Yushin. When she grabbed his cloak, the general was totally confused. The girl then started to carry him away from the arrows with her own strength. He looked like a baby in her arms, which was kind of funny. The young woman finally managed to turn her general's body to protect him. Meanwhile, he questioned her about those sudden moves. Then she held onto him even tighter. After a few seconds of this, arrows began to rain down from the sky. Yushin watched all of that in shock, eyes wide open. Soon the girl started getting hit by enemy attacks. Several arrows fell around them at that moment, but unfortunately, many of them hit the woman directly. After that, she began to weaken in the commander's arms. He looked at her in disbelief, feeling desperate. Yushin didn't know what she was trying to do with all this. Then, the young woman broke the silence, trying to say something to the general. And once again, she ended the conversation without finishing it. Once again, Li Yushin couldn't hear her final words, but he could guess what she was trying to say. She just wanted to protect him, even if it cost her life. What she meant by protecting him, even if it always ended that way, it was a mystery to Yushin. He didn't get why she wanted so badly to be his protector. Yushin, even then, didn't even know her name. He kept denying all the facts, but he couldn't deny that she was something special. And she was the only one who managed to become a true ally of the protagonist in that place. In yet another simulation, the old man shouted again, warning the general that enemy troops were closing in on the plains. The red-haired boy looked at Yushin with a bit of a scared expression. Even the allied soldiers seemed to be in disbelief at what they were seeing. Yushin stared at the girl, super curious about one thing. He wouldn't ask any more about her true identity. Instead, he decided to do just one thing. The boy then took advantage of the attention he had from the girl, and without hesitation, he asked her name. She simply watched him in silence for a few moments. Soon, Yushin realized that his question made her blush. He didn't want to know anything beyond that, so she could spill it without worries. Still, she stayed quiet, seeming not to want to share her name. Yushin didn't know what hit him, but this was the first time he cracked a smile since stepping into that total nightmare. Finally, the girl decides to spill the tea, and this keeps the main dude super focused. She drops the bomb that she doesn't even have a real name. This leaves the boy totally shook, trying to wrap his head around it. What kind of nonsense was that? Then Yushin turns to confront the redhead, who looked like he was enjoying the chaos. He straight up asks why the boy's acting all weird. And the boy says the general was acting clueless about the night. She was an elite soldier of Li, trained for some big mission, just a pawn in the war game. All those soldiers already seemed to know that tea, so it made sense she wouldn't have a name to call her own. Then the redhead tells the general to chill about such a minor detail. This fires Yushin up, telling the guy to zip it. The redhead and even the girl are left speechless. Yushin was fuming that the dude treated his warrior like a toy. The redhead and the gray-haired man watched Yushin's rage with a mix of tension and popcorn vibes. Even the soldiers looked worried about the whole scene. With the other traitors bailing, she was the only one who stuck by Yushin, even if she was just a bunch of programmed data. In that moment, she wore a kinda sad look, and Yushin totally caught that in her eyes. She looked at him like she'd been hit hard by those harsh words. She was definitely different and way better than those other cowards, according to the general. He couldn't figure out why she felt that way. She was just listening, eyes locked on the guy. Then, the young woman finally breaks the silence, saying she wasn't different, just another soldier in the army. This was exactly what Yushin expected. Soon, the gray-haired man tells the general that the enemy troops were rolling in as usual. Then Yushin starts to push that story aside. After all, the enemies were already climbing the castle with their ladders. He had to face that endless wave of deaths again. A few seconds later, the war was kicking off. The allied soldiers were basically getting wrecked by the enemies as always. Then Yushin realizes his heart is racing, probably from the fear. Or maybe it was just nerves kicking in. That energy was bubbling up inside him. Yushin felt like he was about to burst. It felt like pent-up anger, but really it was some unknown power twisting inside him, making him feel all hot and itchy. At that moment, the soldiers were already freaking out about how the battle was going. They looked back, thinking about bailing as fast as they could. Soon, Yushin tells everyone to keep fighting because if they had the energy to run, they could at least take out one more enemy. The boy's vibe felt different from usual. The soldiers noticed it, looking at him like he was a whole new person. Even the redhead seemed kinda impressed by that. Then the gray-haired man tells everyone to fight for their lives, just like the general said. Immediately, the soldiers respond with a loud, "Let's go," while Yushin calls the girl over for a chat. He had a mission just for her, and she needed to listen up. In a respectful tone, she kneels right away to catch the info. Soon, Yushin starts giving his order. He didn't want her to bite the dust before him from now on. Hearing this, her eyes go wide with anxiety. If she messed up this order, there would be serious consequences. She'd pay with her life if she didn't follow it to the letter. And knowing this, she got even more anxious, eyes wide open. Then Yushin takes this moment to double down on his request. Soon, the girl stands up, ready to throw down. Yushin, for his part, tells the whole troop to clear the way because he's taking charge. His allies, without a second thought, jump to obey the order. Somehow, Yushin felt he could take on anything, no matter how many enemy soldiers were out there. Then finally, he gives the command to kick off the attacks. Soon, the info panel pops up, signaling the start of the battle. Meanwhile, all the operators were grinding away at the game. The panel's timer suddenly resets to 0. This causes a wild explosion within the game. One of the operators is totally blown away by this. With his extreme sleepiness, he almost forgot something super important. At that moment, there were only 2 operators around, and one of them was snoozing without a care. Meanwhile, a little further away, 4 of them were just chatting it up. Then one dude asks if the simulator is still working, no cap. It looked like he was about to lose it right then and there. Staring at the monitors, his eyes go wide, totally freaked out by what he sees. He immediately yells for the team leader, no time to waste. This was a serious situation, and he had to get to the control center ASAP. Meanwhile, the battle raged on inside the simulator. Yushin was slicing through enemies with his sword, just another day at the office. His face showed this wild courage and a thirst to win that war. He charged at the foes without a second thought. Just then, the team leader bursts into the control center, shocked by the chaos. All the operators were staring, looking super worried. Meanwhile, the kid's drive to win in the game was skyrocketing. The team leader, watching all this unfold, had a confused look on his face. He then shouts to his crew, wanting to figure out what was going down in the game. Inside the game, a mysterious girl was wrecking enemies without mercy. She was literally turning them into confetti. Seeing that, the team leader got curious about who she was. He started digging to find out who snuck that night's data into the simulator. The data they never programmed was suddenly in the game, and the dude was fuming over this mess. A showdown was brewing between the night girl and the team leader who wanted her gone. To crank up the mental breakdown, every death and restart let the senses feel the pain of dying. Each new simulation was just another chance for the kid to experience the agony of death. That true hell had major risks, but they never thought about cashing in on it. But if someone could break this endless cycle of deaths, everything would flip. In the process, to make up for all their deaths and suffering, they'd gain some serious power. But for that to happen, in that perfect simulator the team leader built, it had to be someone with a mindset beyond high schooler. A little kid like that wouldn't handle all that alone. But in this case, he was impressing the team leader. He seemed to fear no enemy in the game anymore. While bravely fighting, the warrior girl had his back with some epic cover. She looked super determined to win that game too. This meant the irregularity was boosting Yushin's mindset in a major way. So the team leader ordered the girl to be yanked from the game, and if anything got in the way, the kid's brain should be overloaded until it fried. After that order, all the operators jumped into action. They were hustling on the game's programming like it was a race. The task looked tough, judging by their stressed faces. Many codes were written in some wild language, all this to fix that programming glitch in the game. Suddenly, Yushin spots something super weird that grabs his attention. He could see everything happening on the battlefield. Everyone in front of him was moving in slow-mo, even the ones far away. Watching the enemies advance slowly was just bizarre. Even the arrows seemed to be taking their sweet time. They floated through the air slowly without any force. Only their sharp tips were a threat at that moment. Seeing that, Yushin was impressed and realized something was kicking off. Finally, after a few seconds, the arrow zoomed toward him. He easily dodged that weapon. His protector then took the chance to slice the projectile in half with her sword. The arrow shattered into pieces after getting hit hard. Meanwhile, Yushin was taking in everything around him, deep in thought. It was still pouring rain at the battle site. Then Yushin started listening closely. Just by hearing the nameless knight's breathing, he felt something. She was sticking to the special request up to that moment. And this made Yushin crack a small smile of joy because his order was being fulfilled. But no time to chill, the enemy army was already charging at him again. Yushin faced them with a fearless look, ready for whatever came next. Then, one of the soldiers let out a massive shout to scare him, and Su charged at him with 2 sharp harpoons. On the defensive, Yushin watched the attack with insane calmness. He took advantage of the enemy's slip to dodge the attack. Meanwhile, the cowards watched everything, totally impressed. The protagonist then snatched the 2 harpoons from the enemy. Soon he started spinning the bases of the weapons, and he also lifted both weapons, planning to suspend the opponent in the air. This causes the man to be launched away, screaming in panic. He flew through the air, clutching his harpoons, terrified for his life. After finally crashing to the ground, he faces Yushin with pure despair on his face. The protagonist was already closing in to finish him off without mercy. Then finally, Yushin brandishes his sharp weapon and takes out his enemy in a savage and brutal way. From that moment on, all the foes looked at him with scared expressions, fearing for their basic lives. Yushin was ready to take on anything and reclaim his past back home. Without a second thought, he charged at all the adversaries. With his powerful strike, he took down dozens of enemies in mere seconds. The wide-eyed opponent showed the fear he felt, watching Yushin advance mercilessly over his allies. In just a few seconds, the boy arrived there and without wasting time dealt a fatal blow to the man, who disintegrated into several pieces and a whole lot of vital red liquid. After wiping him out, Yushin, hungry for victory, moved on in search of more victims. You could hear the screams of pain and despair from the enemies everywhere. Yushin seemed to have superpowers, finishing them off using only sword skills. The nameless girl was also crushing that army with ease. The two formed a legendary duo. In just a few minutes, hundreds of thousands of enemies were wiped out by the pair. On the ground, there were scattered pieces of the NPC dolls. The boy's sword, splattered with red, showed his strength and will to get back home. There was vital red liquid all over his armor from the wild battle. Looking back, he noticed something that caught his eye. It was a totally exhausted enemy groaning with a humiliating expression. Without thinking twice, Yushin generously ended that man's suffering. Once again, only the dynamic duo was standing tall. At that moment, Yushin paused for a breather, and she also took a deep breath before diving back in. The boy had even lost count of how many enemies he had taken down in that fight, but he didn't get why the numbers weren't going down, and this was totally linked to the actions of the machine operators. Lee Hyeonyu was also messing with the game at that moment, and he seemed super happy tweaking the game results, making everything tougher for Yushin. The enemy count seemed to be increasing non-stop in a weird way. Then the girl approached Yushin and asked if he could still keep going. At that moment, the protagonist felt a sensation like heat. That defied logic, but he could feel an inexplicable rise in temperature where his cold armor touched. Even if Yushin couldn't, he had to keep going. Because in that place, he wouldn't survive even a second unless he fought bravely. The girl then told him that fighting was a tough gig. Everyone, no matter how chill their lives seemed, had their own battlefield hidden in their hearts. Hearing those wise words from the girl, he thought about his own battlefield. This made him flash back to the past where he was running late for class. After a few minutes, he finally found himself in the classroom, doing his own solo assignment. And it was super easy to lose in a fight there, even risking his life. The girl suddenly suggested that the boy just give up. He looked at her confused. For her, giving up was an easy choice, especially since everything would end anyway. If Yushin stayed firm in his determination to fight until the end, the battlefield would stick with him until then. Soon he realized that was probably why, despite all the deaths he had seen, he could still defend himself against enemies in a place like that. And he also always had a loyal protector behind him. So Yushin asked her why she always kept protecting him. As always, he was sure he wouldn't get an answer, but still decided to ask. Again, the boy insisted that he wanted to know the reason for that. To him, she had become a battlefield he could never give up on. And that look of hers hit his heart like a symbol of love. Yushin didn't even need to turn and follow that gaze to know that his senses had become so sharp he could feel it coming. There existed a pattern that neither he nor she could break. Not once since the beginning could the rain of arrows be avoided. After thinking all these things, Yushin asked the girl for an answer again. He thought she might give up on it all, but the girl wouldn't break her silence for anything. Meanwhile, the adversaries advanced, cornering the two. At that moment, the nameless girl looked totally white from all the fighting. In a wild twist, she just tossed her weapon aside. Her steps were something Yushin had never seen on a battlefield before. They were completely free of any sadness or doubt. Yushin was seriously impressed by that. It felt like she was running out of time, as if those steps had only one goal. All of them seemed to be for her own cause. In that moment, she hugged Yushin with all her might while arrows rained down. She was determined to protect her general, and there was no other way to do it. Even if it cost her life, she was going to finish the mission. Just like her general, she would never bail on the fight, and there was no way she would stop trying to win. Going through this endless cycle of loss, Yushin thought he had gotten used to this morning battle. But there was one thing he still couldn't handle. In that moment, he found himself begging the girl to let him go. Meanwhile, arrows were falling from the sky like it was a bad video game. Yushin reminded the girl of the request he had made earlier, but at that moment, she was already heading to a better place. Seeing those arrows stuck in her body, Yushin felt totally hopeless. There were sharp bits of those weapons everywhere. Even he had taken a hit in the back. Still, he didn't stop trying to shield the girl from it all. Then the girl tried to send a message to her general. She didn't want him to give up on life too. And those ended up being the last words of the poor nameless girl, who, after a few seconds, found peace in Yushin's arms. Meanwhile, the team leader was glued to the big screens. He had this serious look while watching the game unfold. Yushin, at that moment, was pleading for the girl's life. Then the boy held her arms super tight and stuck his weapon in the ground to lighten the load. With that, he knelt with the girl resting on his back and made a face of pure determination to hold her up. Then he asked her to open her eyes, knowing she wasn't done yet. The girl had told him to never give up. For their story to be legendary, they had to stick it out till the end, and for that, Yushin wouldn't bail on her, no way. The boy put in every ounce of effort to keep the girl alive. Soon he was begging her to open her eyes. Suddenly, a different movement flickered on the girl's face like a miracle. Then she coughed, showing signs that she was still in the game. Yushin's eyes widened, not believing what he was seeing. The girl was actually alive at that moment. He didn't want her to leave for a better place at all. He begged her to survive for herself. Meanwhile, the enemy soldiers were closing in with bloodlust in their eyes. Yushin tried to move to get the girl out of danger. He was totally drained and his body was wrecked. Even so, Yushin didn't care that his muscles were screaming. He had to move to save his best friend. This also gave him a shot at surviving the battle. Then Yushin gripped his weapon with all his strength and planted it in the ground for support. Suddenly, he started radiating a ton of energy. Even his eyes looked different than usual. The nameless girl at that moment was losing a lot of vital red liquid. Yushin wanted to save her at any cost and begged her to hold on tight. Taking advantage of the delicate situation, the enemies pressed forward. They stared at the two with faces hungry for victory and tried to intimidate them with looks that screamed crazy. Even though he was barely holding it together, the boy tried to protect his loyal shield. He thought of the jerk Lee Hyun-yu who had betrayed him. All those thoughts seemed to fuel the boy's strength. The girl then coughed again, showing signs of life. Yushin had no time for distractions and needed to hustle to survive the chaos. However, something was making it hard to move at that moment. It was his body, which had not a drop of energy left. But the enemies didn't care and had no mercy for the hero. Yushin was desperate to move and pushed himself to do it. The enemies were already closing in on his life. The boy's flesh was all torn up and his muscles were screaming from the effort. But Yushin did not give up at all. He pushed himself harder than ever to move. He then managed to grip his sword tight and lift it up. Little by little, he finally started to rise from that tricky spot. His whole body felt like it was on fire, pure agony. But at the same time, a crazy power was bubbling up inside him, pushing him to stand tall. Gradually, Yushin was getting the strength to rise again. He was super determined to keep moving and win this battle. With that, he finally stood up and charged into the fight against his foes. With one swing of his sword, he knocked down a bunch of enemies with insane force. He pushed forward, taking out opponents without mercy, fueled by a need to rise again. There was a lot of vital red liquid from the enemy army splattered everywhere. But even so, Yushin didn't stop attacking for a second. Meanwhile, Lee Hyun-yu was glued to the screens, totally impressed by the kid's wild attacking power. The operators were freaking out, unable to figure out what was going on. The game was throwing up error messages, saying the combat level was off the charts. It was just like the hits Black One delivered. Yushin was taking down dozens of enemies with a single strike, and he didn't even seem to tire out while doing it. The enemies were already looking desperate, realizing the power this kid had. While he fought, the weak girl called out his name. He tried to listen to her, really focused. She wanted to say something before it was too late. She wished for Yushin to give her a name in all that chaos. Even he was caught off guard by such a random request. In the middle of all this madness, he decided to name her later. After saying that, Yushin noticed the girl shaking her head, leaving him shocked, since she always followed his orders. Then she started explaining why she disagreed. It was because she'd never forget her name if it was given right then. Hearing that, Yushin went quiet. He had a thoughtful look on his face. He watched the enemies closing in the horizon, thinking of a name for the girl. Finally, after a few seconds of deep thought, he started to share his decision. From now on, Yushin would call her Sepia, which meant a reddish-brown color linked to old-school photos. When she heard her new name, the girl lit up with a happy little smile. She approved and praised the name chosen by her general. It reminded her of the sugarcane fields glowing in the sunset back home. At that moment, Yushin was already wiped out from the battle, but still he held the girl's hand tight, and he tried to carry her on his back. Yushin even gritted his teeth and shouted from the effort he was putting in. The protagonist would never give up on Sepia. Seeing the boy's energy fading, the enemy army decided to charge in. Then they came at Yushin, aiming to finish him off. With that, they landed a bunch of hits on him, draining him of liters of vital red liquid. After that, the danger signals from the simulator started to fade away. And finally, the info panel popped up, showing the end of simulation 138. Meanwhile, the operators and the team leader were glued to the screens, super worried but also relieved. Lee Hyun-yu was satisfied to have taken the boy down, but one thing bugged him. Yushin had managed to get under his skin. He didn't expect the protagonist's growth to be this explosive. Suddenly, an operator shouted for the team leader, saying something else was going down. It seemed he found a way to separate Yushin and the knight in the game. At that moment, the boy had flashbacks remembering Sepia all hyped about her new name. He couldn't save that girl. Not even his burst of energy could break through the enemy line. But this time, Yushin was ready to fight even harder for everything to be different. Even if it meant taking out the enemies in the most brutal way possible. He would defend Sepia with every ounce of strength he had. Finally, the info panel popped up, saying Simulation 139 was about to start. As usual, the gray-haired old man warned the general that the enemy troops were rolling toward the plains. Yushin was already set in his mind that he would save that girl. With his eyes, he was scanning the crowd for her. Without a second thought, he shouted Sepia's name. His soldiers just watched him, totally confused about what was happening. Again, Yushin called for the girl, since she said she'd never forget that name. Meanwhile, everyone stared at the boy, thinking he was losing it. The cowards looked totally lost at what they were seeing. The red-haired boy glanced at Yushin, clearly confused. Even the gray-haired old man stared at him, looking completely out of it. No matter how hard he searched, Yushin couldn't spot Sepia anywhere. Then he catches sight of the girl's sword just lying there. His eyes lock onto that weapon like it's the only thing that matters. Yushin freaks out, shouting Sepia's name at the top of his lungs. The cowardly soldiers got even more spooked watching the boys melt down. The red-haired boy asks the general who he's looking for. This dude felt super awkward calling Yushin that. To him, Yushin was supposed to be this legendary figure, but honestly, he seemed like a total shell. The Lee Yushin he knew was a coward who always ran from battle. He just couldn't wrap his head around how such a weakling got to be a big deal in the army. At that moment, Yushin looked seriously ticked off, but he had to admit he had this vibe that only a real general could pull off. Suddenly, Yushin starts yelling, demanding to know where his loyal squire Sepia was. The gray-haired man responds that only God knows who that person is. Fuming at this reply, Yushin gets ready to unleash his rage, but instead he just grabs the old man by his clothes, leaving him shaking in his boots. All the soldiers, including the red-haired boy, shout in panic about the captain. The cowards clutch their weapons tightly, ready to defend the poor guy. They raise their swords as if they were about to challenge their own general. Seeing this, Yushin realizes these guys would rather follow the old man than him. In seconds, everyone turned against him. Yushin, even with the old man denying everything, knew the captain thought he was a cowardly mutt. At that moment, his gaze was pure disdain for his ally. He held him by the neck, treating him like a rag doll, and with barely any effort, lifted the desperate old man off the ground. The red-haired boy watched in disbelief, thinking the captain had to weigh at least 100 kilos, and Yushin was lifting him like it was nothing. Plus, Hallenberg was a knight who could manipulate Terra, which should have made it tough for Yushin to take him on. Yushin didn't care what they thought and just wanted one thing. He needed to know where Sepia was. The red-haired boy, hearing this, wondered who this girl was and if the general was actually losing it. Soon the boy tells Yushin that no one knew where that woman was and he should let the captain go so they could chat. But the protagonist seemed totally uninterested in the boastful red-haired boy. He kept holding that cowardly gray-haired man by the neck, just like he deserved. Then out of nowhere, Yushin turns to the red-haired boy, showing a psychopathic grin. He flashes a wicked smile meant to scare the boy. With that, the red-haired boy starts feeling threatened by Yushin and his insane thirst for battle. Finally, after all that tension, the boy starts to let go of the captain. The old man, once freed, begins to plummet from way up high, and he crashes down hard against the ground. Yushin then, in a totally unexpected move, lunges at the annoying red-haired boy. He grabs him by the neck, leaving him gasping for air. He wanted that cocky boy to spill the beans right then and there. Desperately watching this, the old man yells at the general, saying there was no one named Sepia, and wondering how he could move so fast. Suddenly, the captain's eyes widen, not believing what he just saw. Then he takes a solid hit to his body, and it came from his own belly. Yushin, still holding the red-haired boy, kicks the old man, sending him flying. All the soldiers at that moment looked at him with terrified expressions. Choking on his own breath, the red-haired boy had no chance to react and could only watch his captain get tossed by Yushin. The old man flew far away, looking like a leaf in the wind. Yushin then makes it clear that Sepia was not just some random civilian. She was someone who couldn't be compared to a walking piece of trash like those guys. The owner of a long sword was his only ally on that endless battlefield and proved to be a better knight than all those present. Looking at that weapon, the old man suddenly remembers something. Then he calls out to the general to explain everything. Maybe Yushin was talking about knight number 232. And the protagonist glares at the captain with a furious expression. Even his eyes seem to radiate pure strength. The old man, seeing the boy's face, falls into despair. He wondered if that heavy shadow creeping up on him was really the descendant of the coward he knew. Yushin's footsteps were so loud they could scare a ghost. His vibe was straight up Supreme Commander, nothing like his dad at all. Once again, Yushin reaches for the neck of the poor soul nearby. With that, he drops Sepia's true name and asks where she was, soon finding out she was probably in the infirmary. When he hears this, Yushin gets a little freaked out, wondering why the girl was stuck there. Without a second thought, he tells the captain to lead the way to the infirmary. Then, through the pouring rain, they start their trek to the spot. Finally, after a few minutes of hustling, they reach the place. With anxiety hitting peak levels, Yushin speeds up, leaving his crew behind. Without even thinking, he bursts through the door and shouts for his best friend, Sepia. Everyone in the room turns to him, looking super scared. Almost all the injured seemed totally confused about what was going down. But on one of the last stretchers, Yushin spots a familiar figure. It was Sepia, lying there unconscious, getting help from a nurse. Seeing her like that makes Yushin's eyes go wide with worry. He steps further into the infirmary, leaving the professionals looking totally lost. Soon, Yushin reaches Sepia's stretcher and starts checking her out. He couldn't wrap his head around why this was happening. Sepia looked rough with all sorts of scrapes on her face. When asked why he was there, Yushin jumps at the chance to find out what happened to her. But the nurses had no clue what caused it, even after she'd been there for 10 days. Yushin freaks out when he hears how long Sepia has been stuck there. Just a few minutes ago, they were fighting side by side, and now, according to the nurses, she'd been out for 10 days straight. This made zero sense to him. He then asks the nurse if there's any chance the girl could wake up while thinking about how Lee Hyun-yu could pull off such nasty tricks. Since it was tough to give a solid answer, the nurses just asked the general to keep it down in the infirmary. Yushin was super worried about not seeing her wake up and might have to watch helplessly as he lost his ally. Even the nurse, seeing the boy's pain, wore a sad face. The patients also looked at the general with concern. Meanwhile, the soldiers waited outside, all tense and on edge. Then the nurse tells Yushin he could see her again. This quickly grabs the boy's attention, and he turns to hear what she had to say. According to her, if Yushin went to find the Virgin Mary, he could see Sepia again, because she could heal any illness out there. If Yushin could get Sepia to the Virgin Mary, the nurse was sure she could be saved. Hearing this, the protagonist feels a bit lost about who this woman even was. Then, without hesitation, he asks the nurse what he could do to find her. Meanwhile, the enemies were already gearing up to invade the castle. The climbers quickly scaled the stairs, taking advantage of the rival army's chill vibes. They climbed with mad ease, but up top they ran into the first squad of opponents. According to the nurse, there was only one way for Yushin to meet the Virgin Mary, and that was to win that never-ending battle. If Yushin could lead the war to victory and find the Virgin Mary, he would definitely be able to save Sepia from her illness. But for real, it wouldn't be easy facing those enemies thirsty for a win. All the patients at that moment looked anxiously at the general. He was deep in thought at the foot of that girl's stretcher, and he already knew that if he wanted to see Sepia again, he had no choice but to win the war. Then a soldier tells Yushin that all the headquarters had been wrecked and the enemies would be there soon, while he was already cooking up a plan in his mind. The protagonist's strategy was to fight until he couldn't fight anymore. So he tells Sepia to hang in there, because all his plans would work out soon, and finally that endless battle would come to a close. Yushin ends up confessing that while fighting, there were countless times he thought about throwing in the towel. That wild battle left some gnarly marks on his memory. But through it all, there was one thing that kept him going. Everything he did was for Sepia. Even with those scenes stuck in his head, the main character pushed on thanks to his friend. With Sepia's unwavering support, Yushin started to think he could actually survive in that messed up place. So when she vanished, he freaked out, because if that was real, he was totally doomed to get crushed there. But now he had a legit reason to fight and not back down. In that moment, the enemies charged at him with a hunger for chaos. But he wasn't about to throw in the towel, driven by his need to get home and save Sepia no matter what. Fueled by that fire, Yushin charged at the foes. He swung his sword with the skill of a pro. In just seconds, he unleashed a flurry of strikes. Yushin took down a bunch of enemies who screamed like they were in a horror movie. He was definitely ready to fight to the finish without backing down. And he wasn't scared of the army he was up against. Even if it looked intense, he was just getting warmed up to show off his skills. At the top of the castle, you could see the sheer power radiating from him. Even chunks of concrete were flying apart from Yushin's hits. A bunch of enemies were practically vaporized by that, and the ones left were screaming, begging for mercy. Yushin's face showed he was hungry for victory, but the enemies kept coming, acting like they didn't get the memo about the danger. Without a second thought, Yushin got ready to defend himself. He raised his sword, ready to deliver the final blow. Just seconds later, a massive explosion erupted from his strike. Enemies and debris went flying in the chaos, and Yushin showed zero mercy for the ones who survived. As he scanned the area, he noticed some weird movement from the cowards. Meanwhile, he was giving it his all to win the battle. But then his eyes went wide, realizing what was happening. All the so-called allies were turning tail and running. The old captain and the redhead looked more scared than kittens, and they bolted with the rest of the army in a panic. Yushin's disappointment was written all over his face. Meanwhile, an enemy soldier was sneaking up on him from behind like a total coward. While Yushin was distracted by those traitors, he became an easy target. So he got hit by a harpoon, and it hurt like a truck. In his last thoughts, he cursed his allies, feeling the pain. Blood was everywhere, painting the ground red. Then the info panel popped up, announcing the end of Simulation 139. A wild thought about this endless loop of brutal battles hit Yushin. He wondered when these exhausting fights would finally stop. Once again, everything went sideways and he bit the dust. In the next rounds, it was the same old story. And in the end, through all this pain, Yushin had to fight solo with no Sepia to back him up. No point in hoping for help from those cowards, since they bolted at the first sign of trouble. Yushin then wondered why those guys always tried to bail during a fight with no escape route. Suddenly, his eyes widened, thinking of a wild possibility. Then the info panel popped up, announcing that Simulation 140 was about to kick off. Just seconds later, the old gray-haired dude's voice echoed, saying the enemy legions were rolling in across the plains. At that moment, the boy stood frozen, feeling the rain drench him. Then he asked if the reinforcements had shown up yet. The captain looked confused, totally lost on what he was talking about. Yushin couldn't believe the guy's surprise over such a simple question about reinforcements. Hearing that, the redhead shot them a look that screamed panic. Even with those words, the captain still didn't get what reinforcements the general was on about. As expected, Yushin realized they had reinforcements that even he didn't know about. And on top of that, there was some serious muscle. With that, Yushin figured he wouldn't need to ask any more questions. He was shocked to find out his own crew had kept this info from him. Then he flashed a smirk at everyone around, and he told them he knew about a supposed plan the captain had cooked up. Hearing that, the redhead got all hyped, grilling Yushin for details. According to Yushin, they had used the archers to stall, and this Li lineage was just a trick to throw him under the bus. All that pressure they put on him to give orders was way more twisted than it looked. Those demands from the old dude were part of a seriously shady plan. They didn't expect the kid to actually give a real order. They just wanted him as a pawn while they waited for backup to roll in. All they needed was a clown pretending to be a general. And they used Yushin as the main piece in this messed up game. Still, there was no other way to explain all the nonsense that Army had pulled in his eyes. At first, he was surrounded by folks desperate to throw themselves at Blackwen. When the general started talking, the captain got all jittery. Then Yushin asks the old man if he was Hallenberg and throws the same question at Joseph. The redhead, hearing this, gets super nervous, just like the captain. No matter what excuses those two had, Yushin just wanted them to cut the hypocrisy right then and there. When called a hypocrite, Joseph flipped out. He yells at the general, claiming everything was an unavoidable choice, like they had no options. After hearing this excuse, Yushin finally gets why those guys acted the way they did. But there was a twist to all of this, and that twist was one single person. So Yushin admits this whole thing was planned out and puts himself in their shoes, realizing it could have been him. But as everyone knew, his only goal was to win that battle. So he decides to ditch the waiting for backup strategy right away. Hearing the new orders, the soldiers get even more on edge. Joseph is also shook, thinking this was just absurd. Then the captain slams his sword on the ground, challenging the kid. He quickly calls Yushin over for a serious chat. To him, it seemed like the general thought this was just a game. Those fools were the type to bail before the fight even started and still dared to underestimate Yushin. But he didn't care. Not even death could free him from this endless battle. So even with his body wrecked, he couldn't stop pushing forward, trying to escape the hell. After all this thinking, Yushin gives an order he wouldn't repeat for the soldiers. All the knights should gather at the castle gates ASAP. When they hear this order, the warriors get even more anxious. But already on it, they start moving toward the castle gates. Meanwhile, the enemies were taking more ground and charging in without a care. Even the horses on the allied side looked nervous about this fight. The Tamers were struggling to keep them on track toward the destination. But after a few minutes of chaos, they finally reach the castle gates. Su, the old man, shows up and asks if the Tamers really got all the horses. One of them confirms but points out there's a catch. This makes the captain super anxious with a pretty unhappy face. Then the knight tries to explain what went down. The deal was that one of the horses was refusing to follow the path. Then the old man spots something off about the animal. According to the captain, it was General Li's horse. The creature looked furious at that moment. Yushin, after a bit, arrives at the scene. His soldiers, seeing him, get tense about the problem they're facing. The protagonist still had no clue about the big issue with that horse. So he walks up to the crew and asks if all the animals were there. The captain immediately says yes and asks what the boys' plans are. After hearing this, Yushin orders the gates to be opened. The gray-haired man, startled, asks what they should open right now. Without missing a beat, Yushin points to what he wanted, and that was the massive castle door. Again, Yushin orders the gate to be opened. In a crucial instruction, he tells his soldiers that once the door opens, everyone would charge out of the castle. This statement from the general makes the scared ones even more nervous. They would push forward, taking advantage of the enemies distracted by the wall. And after that, they'd take a huge step toward victory. Yushin seemed unbothered by the wave of enemies coming at them. And the next step he ordered was to seize territory up to Blackwen's base pronto. Once there, something epic was about to go down. The whole army would face Blackwen without a hint of fear. At that moment, Yushin was gearing up for war, and his rage toward that monster fueled his march. Blackwen was his ultimate enemy right then. After all the steps laid out by the general, the army finally took down the big guy and sent all the enemies packing. This was their only shot at surviving in that crazy place. The general's stance while saying this was super intense. Meanwhile, in the castle's stable, a weird calm hung in the air. A rebellious horse was pacing around, clearly on edge. Then it slams its snout against the barn door, trying to bust out. Not getting anywhere, the horse gets even more furious. Outside, the soldiers were questioning Yushin's call. For them, making it off the battlefield alive felt impossible. Even Joseph was throwing shade at Yushin's plan. At that moment, Yushin shot him a look, totally taken aback by his boldness. Once again, the redhead roasted the general, saying he was nuts and would probably bite the dust with the rest. Even the captain was stunned by the guy's guts and tried to shut him down, but he kept going at Yushin. To him, it made zero sense to storm the enemy base with such a weak squad. Then Joseph, acting all brave, called Yushin a fool for not getting the situation. Su and Yushin fired back with the same argument. They were delusional if they thought begging for mercy after the general's death would save them from Blackwen. Hearing Yushin's comeback, the redhead looked totally shocked. Even the soldiers seemed to be on the same page. For that giant black beast known as Blackwen, pity and begging were just pointless. That's why Yushin made it clear that plan was a no-go. Suddenly, the barn door bursts open. Wood splinters fly everywhere. Seeing that, the scared soldiers jump back. The cause of all that chaos was the furious horse finally breaking free. Joseph quickly shouted that this was the former general's horse. The creature was making all sorts of noise, showing off its insane strength. The horse's rage had all the soldiers shook. It looked completely untamable at that moment. Everyone was wondering why it had shown up out of nowhere. Yushin, meanwhile, was just watching the chaos unfold. Joseph soon ordered the guys to catch the horse and calm it down. But at that point, it felt nearly impossible. The creature was thrashing around, hitting anyone nearby hard. Even kicks were flying, knocking soldiers around like ragdolls. One guy got sent flying after a brutal hit to the chest. He screamed in pain from that surprise attack by the horse. The tamer was sweating bullets, trying to handle the wild animal that wouldn't chill. After showing his disdain for the creature, he got hit hard too. Then the other fighters came up with a better plan to stop the horse. They all managed to lasso the creature by the snout, and trying to bring it down, they started pulling on the ropes. But the horse's strength was off the charts, and it didn't even flinch. The animal didn't budge with all those guys pulling on it. Seeing his buddies struggle, Yushin decided to jump in. Without a second thought, he gripped his sword tight. By leaping over everyone, he got closer to the horse. And still in midair, he sliced through all the ropes holding the creature. With that, the guys pulling the ropes ended up tumbling backward. After pulling that off, Yushin landed smoothly on the ground. The soldiers watched, totally freaked out since they hadn't seen that coming. If he hadn't stepped in, those fools would have been trampled to death by the horse. Suddenly, the old gray-haired man started yelling for Yushin to back off, saying it wasn't just any horse. Meanwhile, Yushin was wondering why the horse was acting so wild. It seemed to want to say something to the troops with all that energy. Even its eyes were blazing with anger. The horse stared at the castle gate, looking like it wanted to charge out and take down the invaders. Finally, after all that drama, the door swings open, letting them out into the wild. All the enemies were focused on scaling the wall as fast as they could. Seeing that, the horse couldn't hold back its urge to charge at them. Putting it all together, Yushin finally got it and even cracked a little smile. Suddenly, the horse bolts from the spot. Yushin was right in front of the animal, in serious danger of getting trampled. Seeing that, the general yelled for the kid to get out of the way because it would be a total disaster if the horse took someone out. Even with all the yelling, the animal kept sprinting non-stop. Then it zoomed past Yushin at lightning speed. The boy seized this chance and grabbed the animal's reins. Without a second thought, he yanked her with all his might. The rope tightened under the pressure, ready to snap. The horse, being pulled by the nose, seemed to get even more jittery. But Yushin finally brought the animal to a halt. All the other fools watched in sheer panic, trying to shield themselves from a potential horse attack. The beast stomped its hoof on the ground, challenging its new tamer. But Yushin looked unbothered by that beast and kept holding the reins with all his strength. He even cracked a smile, finding the whole thing pretty hilarious. It seemed the horse was vibing with him too. It looked like it wanted to go wild in that chaotic battlefield again. With that, Yushin realized he still had a solid ally in that cursed place. So he invited the animal to be his loyal squire. Together, they would charge through that battle filled with chaos. They would move from the lion's throat to its heart, pushing forward without stopping. At that moment, the horse shot Yushin an angry look. The boy held onto his reins, determined they would be an epic duo. The horse had a vibe that was totally different from usual. It seemed to mirror the gaze of its former owner, and Yushin was definitely ready to team up with it. Then, in a surprising twist, the horse lowered its head in respect to its new master. All the soldiers present watched in disbelief. Even the redhead was impressed by what Yushin just pulled off. Not done yet, the horse knelt at Yushin's feet. As time passed, Joseph seemed to believe even less in what was happening. At that moment, Yushin's aura was massive thanks to this epic feat. Watching everything on the screens, the team manager was fuming over the chaos inside the simulator. There, the war was wild, especially with the cavalry squad. They charged bravely and quickly towards the enemies. Everyone had faces of pure bravery, refusing to back down from the fight, and they gradually pushed back against the invaders. Leading that giant troop of knights was Yushin on his white horse. It was his first time riding like that, and he had never experienced anything like it in real life. He felt no fear of falling off, but soon noticed something odd. That little guy was adjusting its pace, realizing it was a bit clumsy. This sparked a feeling of guilt in the boy, who felt way better than the animal. Soon he spurred the creature's side, trying to get it to speed up. Yushin was crushing it thanks to some enhanced senses he picked up, pulling him out of the boring pushover zone. After a little pep talk, the horse finally got the message, and without a second thought, it prepared to take off like a rocket. In just a few seconds, it hit an insane speed after an epic burst. Yushin held on tight to his partner, grinning from ear to ear. All his cavalry charged into the sea of enemies, looking fearless. The protagonist's horse seemed to float in the air with its masterful gallop. A bit further back, the knights watched with tense expressions. Yushin and his partner galloped so fast they started to pull away from their allies. The protagonist was gearing up to deliver some serious blows to the enemy's sword in hand. On his face, you could see the pure rage he felt, along with the desire to finally win that cursed battle. Meanwhile, the enemies were advancing towards the top of the castle, but soon they noticed the protagonist's approach. Catching them off guard, Yushin hurled his spear at the invaders. It sliced through the air at breakneck speed, ready to take someone down. After just a few seconds, one of the enemy soldiers got hit by the weapon and screamed in agony. The tool Yushin used spun like a tornado inside the opponent's body and pierced through one after another with ease. After hitting a few enemies, the blade kept slicing through the air with insane power. That single throw from Yushin ended up taking out a bunch of enemies in the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, the sword fight raged on across the battlefield. Even with several allies injured, the invaders kept pushing into the protagonist's territory. The castle's defenders fell from above as if they were nothing. The enemy's climb was getting faster and more effective. Dozens of invaders skillfully used the ladders against the castle walls. Amidst that sea of people, a somewhat familiar silhouette popped up. It was the infamous Blackwen riding his evil horse like a total boss. He was scanning the scene with one eye, looking super serious. His soldiers were scaling the walls, taking over without breaking a sweat. Blackwen, meanwhile, was thinking it wouldn't be long before that castle was toast. And guess what? Yushin was also part of the enemy's wicked plans for chaos. Suddenly, Blackwen started to remember a not-so-great memory, and it probably had something to do with his missing eyeball. He couldn't shake thoughts of the Reaper who yanked out his right eye. There was some juicy info about that warrior. He was a descendant, and now it was the villain's turn to take out what held that dude's head. But Blackwen heard a rumor that his son was a total coward. If that was true, the villain planned to take out both of his eyes first. While Blackwen was lost in thought, Yushin charged ahead with his knights. His blade was finally getting worn out after taking down tons of enemies, and in a few seconds, it was stuck in the ground like a flag of victory. The invaders were in awe of the destruction that weapon had caused, but there was no time to waste, so they focused on the hero, who was getting closer and closer on his majestic white horse. With a sick leap from the animal, Yushin soared over a bunch of enemy soldiers. From up high, he spotted something sketchy down below. The enemies were gearing up for a possible ambush set by the boy. But Yushin looked unbothered and kept charging with a fierce vibe. Without a second thought, he started swinging his sword, taking out enemies left and right. Those left standing were in total despair, facing the legend himself. Even a horse was in on it, stomping hard on some foes. Plus, it was delivering epic headbutts, knocking out several invaders. The dude kept pushing forward, proving they were a force to be reckoned with. Meanwhile, the enemy generals were trying to surround Yushin to take him down. As time ticked by, those invaders seemed more pumped to drag the boy down. But Yushin was watching all this looking fearless. Soon he gripped the reins tighter, ready to charge at another squad of soldiers. The horse seemed more hyped than Yushin to win this battle, and with its snout, it could knock down anyone in its path. Without thinking twice, Yushin dashed toward his spear still stuck in the ground. He snatched it up quick. With that, the hero let out a fierce shout and charged at the enemies with even more power. Meanwhile, Blackwen hoped the Reaper's descendant wouldn't let him down. Yushin, fired up to win, sliced through all the enemies who dared to stand in his way. The despair on those invaders was clear on their tired faces. But the hero didn't hesitate to keep pushing in battle, and it looked like he was just getting warmed up. Yushin and his new horse buddy were an epic and seemingly unstoppable duo in the war. Everyone present was watching in awe as those two worked together. Yushin, impressively, had cleared a path for the troops to follow him. Without a second thought, the boy's knights charged through the gap in the sea of enemies. If they wanted to survive, they couldn't lag behind and had to sprint toward the dreaded Blackwen. But the road to the villain wouldn't be easy with so many invaders. Even with this challenge, Yushin didn't back down and advanced sword in hand, ready to fight. Without hesitation, he delivered a massive blow that sent a bunch of enemies flying off the battlefield. A little ways off, Blackwen was watching everything closely and wondered what kind of beast that was. Suddenly, some of his knights rushed in, shouting his name like it was an emergency. He quickly asked what all the fuss was about. Without missing a beat, one of the knights told him that their soldiers had fallen into an ambush set by the enemy. Hearing this, Blackwen was fuming, unable to believe that some lunatic would ambush an entire base, wondering who that guy could be. Even the captain of the knights looked shocked and knew who the mastermind was. Without hesitation, he quickly revealed that all those troops were led by Li Yushin. Upon hearing this, Blackwen was impressed and threatened the knight if he was lying. But the knight was totally sure of what he said, and the general should trust him. At that moment, Blackwen looked anything but happy, showing a seriously sinister vibe. Suddenly, he let out a terrifying laugh that could scare anyone silly. He wondered who had the guts to call him a coward, because no one in their right mind would think about invading that place. Blackwen couldn't believe Yushin was actually coming for him, so he decided to be polite and welcome him. Meanwhile, the young dude was rolling in with his cavalry troops. The thrill of battle was written all over his face at that moment. For him, it didn't matter if there were thousands or millions of foes. It felt like none of them could stop his epic advance. But no matter what went down, Yushin's goal was clear. Carve a path straight to the villain. Suddenly, a massive sound like a horn blasted through the chaotic battlefield. It was a knight soldier blowing that thing, trying to grab everyone's attention. And guess what? It actually worked. The enemy soldiers seemed to react. Yushin, at that moment, was just standing there looking totally confused. Out of nowhere, a rain of arrows started falling from the sky. Luckily, most of them missed the main character, but still, the worry was all over the boy's face. Even with a bit of fear, the young man decided to keep pushing forward. A few meters ahead, three knights with scared faces were waiting for him, along with a silhouette that looked way too familiar. From the dude's hands, it was easy to figure out who he was. He was rocking a glove that looked kind of familiar. Realizing who the general of those knights was, Yushin seemed even more pumped up. Soon, Black One noticed the protagonist and his horse. Fuming over the situation, Yushin shouted the villain's name with pure rage, and without a second thought, charged at him with his sword gripped tight, ready to take down anyone in his way. All the boy needed was that weapon. The soldiers, meanwhile, were watching everything with super tense expressions. Even the enemies looked scared of that battle. On the screens, the game admins were showing some seriously worried faces about what was happening. Ready for battle, Black One seemed to fear nothing and no one. Yushin, on the other hand, couldn't quite control that fire burning inside him, itching to charge at the big guy. But honestly, just a moment was all he needed, and he had to focus everything on the tip of the sword. Meanwhile, the dreaded Black One slowly approached on his evil horse. He mocked Yushin, praising the boy's willpower, which he was totally ready to crush. Then, finally, the young man found the courage to charge at the big guy. Without hesitation, Black One also got ready to strike the protagonist. Suddenly, a massive flash lit up the area, startling all the soldiers around. Black One and Yushin were locked in an intense fight at that moment. Meanwhile, the soldiers were just trying to protect themselves from all the chaos flying around. The villain charged at the protagonist with zero mercy. His eyes were filled with rage and a desire to wipe that boy off the map. But then Black One was shocked to see that Yushin had actually defended against one of his precise strikes. That show-off kid had stopped the attack from the feared messenger of Neme, known as the embodiment of the lion, with almost no effort. Black One was left dumbfounded by that clever little brat. At that moment, his teeth were grinding in anger at the boy. Without a second thought, the big guy gripped his axe tightly and charged at the young man with all his strength. Yushin was ready, but the dude's strength was insane. He tried to defend himself at all costs in that moment. In the end, he was still roughly pushed back. Even so, he didn't think about giving up and fought bravely against Black One, who seemed super focused on ending his life right then. Yushin couldn't give up and didn't even consider it at that point in the game. He used all of his strength to try to stop that strong villain. But Black One felt like an invincible opponent to the boy. In any case, he had come too far and wanted to leave there victorious, no matter what. However, getting past the feared Black One who attacked without mercy was not going to be easy. Yushin tried to defend himself from the enemy's axe strikes, super focused. But unfortunately, Black One landed a precise axe blow that, even with the defense, caused a huge negative reaction. Yushin ended up flying far from his horse. He skidded along the ground for several meters thanks to the force of the blow he had defended. Without hesitation, the boy tried to use his sword to stop as quickly as possible. Finally, after a few seconds of serious effort, he started to slow down. The relief was so intense that Yushin even let out a heavy sigh. But soon he realized that Black One was definitely not there to play. The villain was already charging at him again, ready to smash him with that huge axe. Startled, Yushin watched the scene unfold, realizing just how strong his enemy was. At that moment, Black One flashed a psychopathic grin, clearly loving his dominant role in the fight. Then, out of nowhere, he launched a massive punch at the protagonist. Luckily, Yushin managed to leap high, dodging the hit just in time. But the despair on Yushin's face was real. He was dodging every single one of Black One's attacks, and it looked like he was just running away from the fight. Black One, noticing this, mocked the descendant, asking where that epic energy from earlier had vanished. Yushin seemed to have a secret plan and brushed off the big guy's taunts. All he could think about was smashing that show-off's head into the concrete. His time in the air was running out. Realizing this, the villain's evil horse charged in, aiming to take him down. Fortunately, Yushin caught on to the horse's sneaky move. Without a second thought, he dodged the beast and slashed at it with his sword. With no strength left, the horse crashed hard onto the ground. As he scanned the area, Yushin noticed something that grabbed his attention. Even after searching every corner, he couldn't spot Black One anywhere. All that was left was an injured horse and a bunch of regular enemies. Finally, Yushin spotted a familiar figure up high. There was a shadow that definitely looked like his opponent. In that moment, Yushin thought he had some strength left, but he could barely move. The gap between his power and the opponent's was insane, as Black One attacked from every angle without a care. Seeing a frontal strike coming, Yushin gripped his sword with all his might. His weapon was already in a defensive stance, ready for action. Just seconds later, Black One charged at him with full force. The villain even laughed at the boy, saying his fun was about to end. Then bam, Yushin's sword shattered into pieces, turning into a shower of steel flying across the battlefield. Yushin got knocked back hard from that hit. He was thinking about how he might lose and how huge the gap was between him and his opponent. Meanwhile, Black One kept coming at him. Yushin still couldn't believe it was all happening like this. Usually, everything ended with a critical hit and he had no clue what was next. But if Black One kept attacking like that, even he would eventually tire out. So Yushin decided that moving forward was the only option at that moment. Suddenly, the info panel popped up, saying the simulation had just wrapped up. The game seemed to be ending right there. A bunch of sound alerts went off, and according to the panel, Yushin was sitting in 6th place overall. At that moment, the machine was calculating all his experience points from the game. Yushin felt Blackwen must be getting tired of the fight. Even a monster would wear out if he kept attacking nonstop. The protagonist also saw the first attack as a way to lead him to that sweet victory. He just needed to hold on for another 60 seconds. After that, Blackwen would be at his limit, and he'd only have to survive one more big hit. Suddenly, the info panel popped up again, saying the simulation was restarting. Yushin looked super focused, just waiting for the monster to strike, which of course charged at him with a serious thirst to take him out. After landing a blow, a massive flash lit up the area from the force of the impact. Blackwen, after finishing that attack, was shocked by what he saw. Lee Yushin had totally dodged that deadly axe strike like a pro. In that moment, he was laser-focused, planning to stick to that strategy until the end. But unfortunately, the protagonist got hit squarely by the enemy, and all his plans went up in smoke. Then the info panel popped up, saying his experience points were being calculated. And just like that, a new simulation was starting. With no time to waste, Yushin jumped back into action. He gripped his sword tight, defending against enemy strikes. He didn't hold back on counterattacking either. Blackwen stared at him with a psychopathic look, clearly ready to unleash something wicked. Then out of nowhere, he swung his axe with insane power. He was just looking to have even more fun with that battle. But Yushin was super hyped for victory and wasn't about to back down until the very end. So the protagonist steps up closer to his opponent, with only 30 seconds left for his plan to kick in. At that moment, the showdown between Blackwen and Yushin was locked in again. The one-eyed dude looked furious and was ready to wipe the kid off the map. Yushin, on the other hand, had this laser-focused, kinda tense vibe going on. But then he totally whiffed a crucial sword strike against his enemy. After dodging that hit, Blackwen jumped on the chance to counterattack. He literally yanked Yushin by his hair, and without a second thought, the villain tossed the kid way out of there. After that, Blackwen swaggered over, taking full advantage of his moment of power. At that instant, Yushin was stuck, gasping for air. But Blackwen was all about finishing him off ASAP. Once the big guy hit that goal, the info panel popped up again, announcing the simulation restart. The previous scenes were played with Blackwen trying to grab the kid by his hair again. But this time, thankfully, Yushin managed to dodge that trap. With a quick jump back, he put some distance between himself and the enemy. Then he faced Blackwen with a seriously angry look. He was ready to throw down with the villain for a while until fatigue kicked in. But Blackwen wasn't about to roll over and take the L. Even while battling hard, Yushin thought about how this fight was way more than just the start. Since he showed up, the war had become like iron sharpening iron. He'd been through countless finishes. But he was still standing, leveling up one after another. He wasn't just some random animal in a slaughterhouse. Yushin in that moment gripped his sword tight with only 10 seconds left for everything to go right. He was determined to hold on until the end, even if it cost him everything. When thrown, he planted his weapon in the ground to slow his fall. Finally, Yushin managed to stop and was closer than ever to the end of the countdown. His enemy didn't give him a second to breathe, already demanding new moves. With only 8 seconds left, Yushin barely blocked a deadly axe strike from his opponent, but Blackwen kept charging at him, eyes full of rage. Yushin looked kinda stoked about how this was playing out and even cracked a slight smile. Then, out of nowhere, he hurled his sword at Blackwen, who in turn just stood there watching the weapon fly through the air. At that moment, the big guy seemed to realize he was in serious trouble. There were still 7 long seconds left for all of Yushin's hard work to pay off. Again, surprisingly, the kid managed to block another axe strike with his feet. With each epic dodge he pulled off, more time ticked away. His secret weapon was still soaring through the air. Then Blackwen caught on to the whole plan. Yushin was cooking up to take him down, and his face twisted with rage. With only 5 seconds left until checkmate, Yushin gripped his sword tight again. With no time to waste, he tried to dodge another blow from the villain. Blackwen was also getting ready to try and wipe the kid out again. His psychopathic look at that moment could scare anyone. Unfortunately, with only 2 seconds left, Yushin got hit and spat out a ton of blood. He was super mad at Blackwen's audacity. Losing a battle at that point in the game was way too easy. It would only take giving up everything. But if he didn't give up, something had to happen. In this case, the battle would definitely keep going. After that thought, remembering his best bud, Yushin got pumped with motivation. Then he charged at the enemy, ready to end it all and cursing him out. Yushin, at that moment, fought hard, landing tons of hits on his opponent. Blackwen, in turn, tried to defend himself like crazy, looking for a chance to counter. The battle was locked between the two and was about to wrap up any second. Fatigue was already showing on Yushin's face, but he wouldn't back down for anything. Even super tired, he held on tight. That crazy battle was one of the biggest challenges of his life. Blackwen finally started to wobble, showing signs of fatigue. His defeat seemed close, and his face showed all the anger he felt about it. From a distance, his soldiers watched everything anxiously, noticing their leader's decline. Even the simulation controllers looked tense with the situation. At that moment, Blackwen seemed unable to believe he was losing to that kid. He had already gone easy on Yushin because of his rep as the son of the Reaper. Some scraps of steel ended up flying toward the soldiers, and several of them get hit out of nowhere, and it hurts man. Without a second thought, Yushin charges at those traitors. The soldiers, panicking, thought they were facing a real monster. Yushin's rage was written all over his face. Then he slams an elbow into a soldier's face with all his might. The dude, caught off guard, gets sent flying from the impact. This guy, after taking the hit, crashes to the ground like a bag of trash. Yushin jumps at the chance to grab a sword. With that weapon locked in his grip, the kid looked totally unstoppable. No hesitation, he charges at the other soldiers, landing precise hits. The men screamed in pain and despair. It was wild. Even the blonde girl looked pretty freaked out by all this, but Yushin showed zero mercy. His face said it all. In just a few moments, he took down a bunch of soldiers without breaking a sweat. Realizing the kid's strength, the blonde started to wonder what he really was. Suddenly, Yushin moves closer, hands creeping toward her. In no time, the blonde finds herself choked and pinned down by the protagonist. Holding the breathless girl up, he tells her he's the one asking questions now. Yushin remembered that girl he met in the Alog testing room chatting with Lee Hyun-yu. He clearly recalled her arguing with the director of that company. They were shouting at each other, saying some pretty weird stuff, and because of that, he couldn't make heads or tails of it. He wanted her to spill everything she knew, patience running low. Meanwhile, she thought the kid was nuts and on the same level as Blackwin. Yushin was definitely a rank 3 knight, but still seemed clueless about this place. He was super mad. No one was listening to him. Then he grabs the blonde by her legs. Thinking it through, Yushin figured if she died, it would reset the whole simulation. When she heard this, the girl freaked out, wondering what he was planning. Then he tightened his grip on her ankle. She quickly fell into despair, begging him not to do anything. But he reassured her she'd be fine, just had to endure the pain until it was over. After saying this, Yushin starts to put serious pressure on her ankle. She screams desperately, the pain hitting hard. The sound of her screams echoed through the castle, terrifying everyone. Those screams caught the attention of some soldiers guarding the entrance. Hearing those screams from inside the building sent chills down spines. Even with the girl in agony, the protagonist didn't stop. Navi was going for her other leg. Upon hearing this, the girl screamed, saying she'd tell him everything she knew. After that, Yushin felt a rush of happiness and even flashed a slight evil grin. But she had one condition. He had to be her ally if anything went down later. Hearing this, Yushin's face turned to pure anger. His rage was because she thought she could bargain with him. Realizing the trap she walked into, the girl couldn't hide her pain. Even her teeth were grinding from all the agony. Yushin wondered why she was doing this for a simple game. The girl was shocked when she realized he still thought this was some online game and told him the truth. When she said all of this wasn't a game, Yushin looked totally confused. But to spill more info, the blonde wanted him to accept her condition first. Since he didn't care about anything but Sepia, he ended up accepting the deal, not minding who he'd fight next. Then the girl asked for his attention. Soon she told him that where they were wasn't a game at all. The project was military and ultra-secret, more like a simulator made for armed forces. Hearing this, Yushin got even more confused. All of that was to train the power he was using, a kind of program to develop a lot of terra. Yushin, after hearing this, got furious, thinking everything was just an illusion in a simulator. But the girl wasn't done explaining everything. And then she drops the bomb that this power could also work in reality. So Yushin's eyes go wide, thinking there's no way that could be true. But according to her, that simulator made it possible. For that was the reason and the true purpose of the real. But then, branch manager Bernard and team leader Lee Hyun-yu totally messed up this tech. It turned a bunch of innocent folks into guinea pigs, no joke. So, there was a report about some shady supplier. And that's why the blonde jumped into the simulator to figure it all out. When Yushin heard this, he looked straight up shocked, like he couldn't even. As much as it hurt to admit, the blonde had a tiny role in the real simulator. But putting that aside, Yushin was curious why he got picked. It had nothing to do with military tests or illegal stuff. He was just a regular high school kid who wanted to play a VR game in a way that felt real. Already answering this question, the girl said he was just another underdog in the beta squad. After hearing all this, Yushin was so mad he could bite nails. Fuming, he still thought the girl was totally lying. So he grabbed her neck a bit tighter, not cool at all. For a moment, it looked like she was about to fade out. From Yushin's face, it seemed he didn't regret being a jerk one bit. He kept her up in the air, looking like she was out cold. Suddenly, she reacted, saying she had no clue why he was chosen first. And even if he twisted her neck, her answer would stay the same. Hearing this, Yushin was a little rattled. But she had more to say about that simulation, ignoring all the reasons. At that moment, it was a nightmare just to deal with a loser named Lee Yushin, and she was totally aware of that. While listening to her, Yushin looked deep in thought. To reach this goal, she said the branch manager and Lee Hyun-yu would sell their souls to the devil. While Yushin and the blonde had this serious chat, those two clowns were on a video call. The branch manager wished Lee Hyun-yu luck with his plan, looking super skeptical. With that promise of never letting the boss down, the dude totally took the blame and was in deep trouble. Finally, they hung up the video call. One of the game controllers even tried to change Mr. Lee's mind, but got shut down and ordered to sync him with the link, sending the 9th special item. At that moment, Lee Hyun-yu was itching to jump into the game and make things happen himself. He was dead set on taking out Lee Yushin, no matter what. Outside the prison, the soldiers jumped at a woman's terrified scream. Walking in, the guys were shocked by who they saw. The general was there in a totally unexpected way. And on top of that, he was chilling with the blonde all alone. The woman even looked relieved when she spotted those soldiers. Then those guys called her princess with a pretty confused look. Hearing that, Yushin chuckled, not buying it for a second. The woman quickly shot back, saying she was totally the princess of that world. Then one of the soldiers spilled that everyone had been searching for the general like crazy. After hearing this, Yushin was a bit puzzled about why they were looking for him. Meanwhile, on the castle walls, a bunch of soldiers were gathered, looking super hyped after a tough battle. Many were laughing and celebrating even while still working. The vibe there was all about festivity and warrior spirit. But suddenly, one of them spotted something that caught his eye. A little higher up was a familiar silhouette. Without a second thought, he yelled that General Li Yushin was right there. Then the guys looked at the great commander who had taken down the messenger of death, Blackwen, with mad respect. The whole crowd started saluting Yushin like he was a real-life hero. A little way off, the princess thought it felt like a K-pop concert. Then she called out to the general in a friendlier way. She quickly apologized for interrupting, but there was something he really needed to know. If he wanted to escape that simulation, he had to not just defeat Blackwen, but also take his head. Upon hearing this, Yushin cracked a slight wicked smile. Since the day he got trapped there, that was the answer he had been hunting for. Then he started having flashbacks of begging to leave that place, and wondering why he had been stuck there. Some time ago, the gray-haired dude dropped the bomb that Yushin had to face Blackwen. They called him a general, and everyone kept whispering Blackwen's name like it was a horror movie. Even Sepia made it crystal clear that Yushin had to fight until he was totally wiped out. It was wild how many squads he'd been in since this whole mess started, but honestly, it felt like a bad joke that wasn't even funny. After all the battles, the kingdom seemed chill, but the real chaos was just getting started. Far away, a guy in a super creepy outfit rolled up to what looked like a cabin. He probably came to fix Blackwen's axe or something. And rumor had it he was a mega powerful magician from the kingdom. Since the general wanted it, the dude said he could whip up a way stronger axe for him. But the real reason he showed up at midnight was to drop some intel from the second prince. A genius plan was already in the works to guarantee the general a win in the next battle. When Blackwen heard this from the magician, he was all, "What's the deal?" But he was told he just needed to let the other soldiers take the lead in the battle tomorrow. A girl still hadn't come back, and they said she was gone, but Yushin felt deep down she was still out there. This girl meant the world to him. He had set off for a land where the endless red liquid flowed without mercy, and screams of pain echoed everywhere all the time. She probably ended up in that same place, and only by keeping that promise would they reunite with the ring owner. All of this felt like a wild dream or some trippy hallucination because Yushin swore he'd been here before. He couldn't shake Sepia from his mind, no way. And in that moment, he silently thought about everything. He could feel Sepia somewhere in that dream. She was in danger, right in the middle of a battle. But she always had that sweet vibe that totally captivated him. Even with weapons flying in her, she looked so gentle. Seeing Sepia in danger, Yushin let out a desperate scream. Everyone around him jumped, totally confused. Yushin quickly searched for something to hold on to. She looked pretty weak at that moment. His shock was so intense that it felt like his heart was about to explode. Soon, a nurse rushed in, super worried about him. Still shaken from the dream, he felt a wave of relief when he saw Sepia lying on a stretcher next to him. It was like she was right there, in front of him. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door. It was the princess, wanting to share some news with General Li Yushin. Even though she didn't want to drop this bad news at such a rough time, she had to spill that unknown folks were invading the kingdom. When Yushin heard this, his eyes went wide like he couldn't believe it. A bunch of armed soldiers were marching in, making their presence known. They slammed their weapons on the ground, trying to intimidate the defenders like it was a showdown. Once again, a sea of enemies was at the castle gates, ready for round 2. Out of nowhere, they started doing something super weird. This threw the defenders off, since they thought these guys would charge in like hungry hyenas at dawn. Even Yushin was shocked to see Blackwen not going for a direct attack as everyone expected. This left him feeling pretty freaked out, because what they were up to was still a total mystery. A bunch of soldiers formed a front line for no reason and just stood there looking like they were waiting for something. From a distance, Blackwen wondered why he only had 9 guys in the first combat squad. He thought those dudes alone weren't enough to snag the glorious victory promised by Li Mu. But the gray-haired man seemed super confident in his plan. Since he showed up, failure wasn't an option, and he promised more than just victory for Blackwen's crew. With all his magic, he decided it was time to go after the enemy. Suddenly, all the soldiers changed completely, like they were possessed by some kind of spell that seemed to pump them up with strength and will to fight. After a bit, the soldiers finally started moving, ready to attack the castle. Watching this, Yushin had a seriously worried look on his face. Blackwen also kept a serious gaze on his troops as they advanced. Then out of nowhere, those soldiers started moving in a totally different way. They spun around at insane speeds, like they were creating a hurricane right there. After a few seconds, those dozens of soldiers morphed into one massive beast. Astonished, the castle defenders gawked at this, totally confused. That thing born from the fusion looked like a dragon that just dropped in. Even the princess, spotting this creature, was shook, her face screaming fear. As time went on, that monster kept growing, merging with more soldiers, and slowly it took form, revealing its true self. After this transformation, the creature decided to crash Li Yushin's territory. With a massive hit, the monster created a huge explosion at the castle gate. This wrecked the defenses that were supposed to keep everyone safe. From above, the defending soldiers watched in terror, fearing for their lives. Still, the monster kept pushing forward, looking totally unstoppable. The creature took out everything in its path without a second thought. The gates were nothing to the monster, which slammed into them to free its army. Even giant stones were hurled at the poor castle defenders who were trapped in chaos. The destruction was wild wherever that evil thing went. Soon the princess figured out this wasn't a dragon but a hydra, since chopping off a head just made two grow back. That creature was a real nightmare that could scare anyone. At that moment, it was trying to smash down the castle gate with all its strength. Then it started climbing that massive wall of the building. The few soldiers on top of the monster had an easier time reaching the castle's peak. Noticing this, the princess yelled out, warning everyone that the hydra was coming. All troops needed to rush to the main gate or else no one would survive to tell the story, according to the blonde. Without a second thought, all the squads jumped into action and headed to the spot. Meanwhile, the enemies charged forward, overwhelming the castle. A little ways off, Blackwind watched everything with a serious look. Yushin, for his part, pointed out all the hydra's heads. This instantly grabbed the princess's attention. He just wanted to chop off all the heads that monster had. As he plotted his victory, the battle raged on with huge stones flying everywhere. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Li Yushin leaped off the castle like a madman. Seeing this, the soldiers freaked out and shouted for their general. Yushin was falling from a crazy height, making it look like it was game over for him. The princess was totally confused, wondering why the hero was pulling a stunt like this. After a few seconds in free fall, the boy got ready to land. Then, still in the air, he spotted a stone plummeting next to him. Without a second thought, Yushin kicked that stone, aiming for the enemies below. After that, he kept falling toward the ground. But on the flip side, the stone zoomed toward the enemies at insane speed. And then it finally hit the ground, causing a massive explosion. For a few seconds, all you could see was debris and dust flying everywhere. That clever move from the boy ended up messing with the hydra in some way. And judging by the wild look on Li Yushin's face, he was just getting started. Then, without a second thought, he charged at that monster, fearless. At that moment, the battle between the hero and the monstrous creature kicked off. Yushin charged at that freak without a hint of fear. The hydra's defensive moves were clear as the protagonist kept attacking. But none of that mattered, as Yushin landed hits on those heads like a champ. Even losing several limbs, the hydra stood tall, ready for more. But the protagonist wasn't backing down and kept ripping off those heads one by one. As time passed, the hydra seemed to struggle with the painful hits and roared in agony. And then finally, Yushin landed a blow with his sword that was the checkmate of that battle. After that, he stayed alert for any reaction from the hydra. Yushin's face was super focused and even pumped about his plan's success. Blackwind, for his part, looked totally stunned by what he was witnessing. The princess's horror and the soldier's panic were super clear at that moment. At that point, Yushin was surrounded by enemies and looked like he had nowhere to run. From the top of the tower, his soldiers shouted desperately, calling out his name. Meanwhile, the princess was convinced that the hydra shouldn't even be in that simulator, which meant they dropped that monster in there just to take out Li Yushin, now that he had awakened. What kind of nightmare the boy had been through was a total mystery to her. While the war was going down, Blackwind rolled up to the battlefield on his horse. He threw some serious shade at the wizard for being in the front lines. Li Hyun-yu shot back, saying they were just getting warmed up. Blackwind looked a bit shaky hearing that. Then he dropped the bomb that he'd gifted him with a certain vision, better known as a true endless hell. While this was going down, the princess was shook, realizing just how powerful that monster really was. Yushin, on the other hand, was taking in the chaotic scene around him. Then it hit him that the hydra didn't reset, it just kept regenerating. It was like they sent a zombie to take on the main character. According to Blackwind, that was an unbreakable doll, a wild toy to mess with. One of the hydra's heads, just like the others, had a seriously psychopathic vibe. The monster looked completely unstoppable. Even after taking a ton of hits, the hydra kept charging at Yushin. Then the princess spotted something on the creature's face that made her super anxious. Even Yushin couldn't believe his eyes. Suddenly, the princess yelled for him to stop attacking, saying strength wouldn't help take down that freaky creature. She insisted he shouldn't even try to face the hydra. Li Hyun-yu was grinning, thinking that even if everyone found out his secret, it wouldn't change the fact that this was the end for Li Yushin. The showdown between the monster and the protagonist was already heating up, both locked in a fierce stare. Yushin's attempts to land a fatal blow on the hydra were obvious, with tons of vital red liquid splattered everywhere. But the monster didn't flinch at all from the boy's hits. Realizing this, he widened his eyes, pure fear showing. But the war kept raging and he couldn't afford to pause for a second. The hydra charged at him without mercy. The monster's attacks were wild and relentless. And Yushin got blindsided from behind. Luckily, he managed to spin around just in time to block the hit. And without a second thought, he hurled a chunk of the hydra away from him. Every moment, Yushin was on the defensive, dodging a barrage of attacks. The hydra felt the impact of the boy's hits a few times. From a distance, the general's soldiers watched in despair as the boy took on this crazy challenge. At that moment, the young man looked totally worn out, with no shot at a comeback. He was coughing up a lot of vital red liquid, showing just how weak he was. From afar, Blackwind was watching everything with a serious face. Seizing that moment of Li Yushin's weakness, the hydra charged at him. Soon, parts of the monster were flying everywhere. Specifically, It was coming at Yushin with blood in its eyes and a massive weapon in hand. Inevitably, the protagonist took a brutal hit to his body. That Hydra's charge seemed to have worked out for it. A few moments after that attack, all that could be seen was dust in the area. And when it cleared, it was obvious there was no sign of life left in Yushin's body. Soon, the info panel popped up, saying Simulation 613 was about to start. With that, the princess realized these new enemies weren't like the extras the protagonist usually wiped out. But Yushin didn't seem to care much about this crucial info. From what the princess had heard around the village, these guys were immortal soldiers, and this plan from the branch manager and Lee Hyung-yu was a total abomination. Not to mention the other creepy dudes who were people missing for ages like the legendary Knight Arslan, along with the kid Medici who had black hair, and the bearded dude known as Voltic, and the shady dark-skinned guy named Kundo. All of them had vanished without a trace in the past, and according to the info panel, they were ranked as true geniuses. Because of all this, even though Yushin was a Master Knight of rank 3, taking them down alone was impossible. But the young man looked super confident about what he was planning, because there was no one else around who could send these guys to purgatory. As the boy's words reached her ears, the princess felt a wave of nerves wash over her. Even her soldiers were staring at her with tense faces. The princess absurdly thought that she and some of those troops frozen in fear could actually help in the battle. At that moment, Yushin looked deep in thought about what he was going to do. The princess, on her end, kept a close eye on him, trying to figure out what was going on. As embarrassing as it was to admit, she already had the one name that could get through those crazy gates, and that someone was the main character, better known as Lee Yushin. He was the only one who could pull this off, and the princess totally trusted him. Then she shouted to Lee Yushin, ready to hand him some kind of amulet. The boy was a bit thrown off, realizing he was about to get a pendant as a gift. That thing reminded him a lot of Zelda and looked pretty similar. According to her, it was way more than just a pendant, since the Terra Crystal had been chilling for 7 years, waiting for a so-called emergency. Yushin felt a bit shy about accepting such a meaningful gift, but she insisted, saying it was important for what they were facing. With the stakes so high, if he went down, she would too, so she decided to go all in, believing in him. Listening to her, Yushin felt a bit puzzled by all this trust. To him, it was wild for someone to act that way in the middle of all this chaos. He thought only Sepia had that sweet vibe of always wanting to help. So it seemed like the protagonist wasn't alone in this fight after all. Finally, Yushin took the amulet from her. Without a second thought, he charged into battle, ready to throw down. At that moment, Yushin had this fierce look on his face. Meanwhile, the beast charged at him, eyes blazing, swinging a deadly weapon his way. Yushin felt this crazy energy coming from the amulet. This wave of power was something totally different from his own. The girl who gave him the gift was watching the fight closely. Even if she wasn't as tough as him, the enemies had to be desperate to survive in all this chaos. And that's why they wouldn't last much longer, according to the protagonist. Yushin's face showed some stress. Anyway, the battle with the Hydra was already on. In the heat of the fight, he got hit by one of the weapons and the amulet shattered into tiny pieces. Suddenly, Yushin let out a massive shout, telling everyone to get out his way. At that moment, he was gearing up for a huge ambush on the beast. Then, after a few seconds, he landed a powerful hit on his enemy. From a distance, the soldiers of Black Wen watched, totally amazed by the boy's strength. Even Lee Hyung-yu was left speechless, unable to believe his eyes. Little by little, Yushin was wrecking the Hydra. The monster was slowly turning into a pile of red sand. This time, the protagonist was dead set on wiping out that abomination. And one question he had was whether that creature could regenerate all day. As time went on, Yushin was expertly taking down the Hydra, giving it everything he had. Traces of the monster's vital red goo were floating in the air. With each hit from Yushin, more of that fluid spittled out of the Hydra. This meant Yushin was probably going to win this battle soon. Lee Hyung-yu on his end couldn't believe his special creation had turned into just a heap of red sand. Yushin had expertly shattered the dice until they hit this critical point. And this boldness from the protagonist filled the boss with rage, making him curse. Then he decided to hit a button on his purple ring. In no time, Lee Hyung-yu began to teleport, ready to unleash a seriously wicked trump card. In a split second, he magically vanished from the scene and quickly popped up in the kingdom's infirmary, looking pretty psychotic. His plan was to crush the fragile heart of the protagonist, and he was going to use Sepia to get to his goal. At that moment, Lee Hyung-yu was already close to the girl's stretcher, ready to cause some trouble. Suddenly, a nurse showed up and freaked out. Not knowing who this guy was, Lee Hyung-yu responded to her in a rude and totally disrespectful way. Meanwhile, outside the infirmary, the soldiers were celebrating that Lee Yushin had taken down the dragon. Even with the pendant's help, the princess knew the protagonist was something else. At that moment, he stood still in the middle of the battlefield, soaking in his victory. But suddenly, he heard a massive noise that grabbed his attention. This also ended up scaring the princess. Soon a soldier rushes in to tell the royal princess that the noise was coming from inside the castle, and it was a wild ambush set up by the enemies. With that, total chaos starts to take over the kingdom again. You could still see a ton of red sand from the Hydra all around. Realizing his friend was in serious danger, Yushin screams for her, totally panicking. Then he spots something that makes his stomach drop. It was Lee Hyun-yu, throwing some serious shade at him and the royal princess holding Sepia and saying he'd take her far away. But being the classic villain, he didn't promise to just take the girl. Hearing the threats from that jerk, Lee Yushin yells back, fuming. Without a second thought, he grabs his sword, ready to save Sepia from that scoundrel, and in a flash, he charges at Lee Hyun-yu, swinging with all his might. But of course, that villain was already gone, teleporting to some unknown spot. Then Lee Yushin, feeling pretty defeated, starts to doubt himself, thinking he didn't live up to his general bloodline. He felt like a total failure who couldn't even protect someone he cared about, even though she was right there. Soon a royal princess jumps in, asking if that night really mattered that much to him. Yushin looks at her with a face that screams, "I'm crushed." He loved Sepia so much he'd jump into a pit of doom, even if it meant walking straight into a trap. While they were chatting, Lee Hyun-yu popped up in another location after his teleportation. Finally, he landed where he wanted to be after pulling off such a nasty plan. He stomps in looking pumped because his evil scheme was working so far. Sepia, on the other hand, looked totally wrecked, her face showing how rough she felt. Lee Hyun-yu roughly tosses her to the ground and steps on her. He thought she was some glitch or hacker in the simulation. Sepia could only react by crying and screaming, totally overwhelmed. Then she asked Lee Hyun-yu what he was so scared of, guessing that his bosses from the other world had him in a tight spot. Hearing this, the guy gets all jittery, wondering how she knew that. Again, she assumes he's just super scared of someone showing up. This makes him even angrier, and he curses Sepia in a seriously gross way. Lee Hyun-yu claims he's not scared and plans to take her and Lee Yushin out when the hero shows up to save her. Meanwhile, the boss is hyped, waiting for the boy to arrive. His soldiers look ready for a possible new showdown. The soldiers are all ears, keeping an eye on the camp they're in. According to Lee Hyun-yu, it wouldn't be long before no one could reset the game as many times as Yushin, who would fall into the trap and surrender to death. While the villain anxiously waits for the boy, Sepia is snoozing like an angel. Yushin, on his end, is gearing up to save his friend. Even though this was a massive trap, it was clear how much Sepia meant to him, making him do crazy stuff without a second thought. Based on this, the princess asks if he's really going to dive headfirst into this mess. Yushin turns around, looking at her with a fierce determination. Then a soldier runs in with news for the general. He says if this is truly what the boy wants, everyone will follow him with pride. Hearing this, the boy looks totally shocked. Even though it felt like a total suicide mission, he realizes the soldiers are dead serious. Seeing those determined faces, Yushin asks if they really want to join him on this tough journey. Yushin had saved those guys' lives not long ago, so they decided to leave their families behind in the kingdom to fight alongside the general. Hearing the soldiers talk about their hopes for a return, Yushin realizes he's not the only one fighting for it. They'd all feel the same way. Then the princess says she knows that nasty wizard well and he probably crawled to the abandoned depot. And that's why Yushin should launch the invasion while a distraction is happening, getting out of there as fast as possible with Sepia in his arms. Seeing the girl's determination, the protagonist is totally impressed. He didn't know when or why, but if she vanished, everything would totally fall apart along with the castle. So the hero decides to rally all of his soldiers to save his friend. Then he whips off his iconic cloak, the one he wore through all those epic battles. Meanwhile, in the creepy warehouse, Sepia was getting roasted by the dude who didn't believe in a rescue plan from the general. But he was dead wrong, cause Yushin was already charging him with fire in his eyes. Then in a hot minute, the enemy soldiers catch wind of some weird movements around the warehouse. And that first sight sends chills down their spines. Yushin stormed in with his cavalry, ready to bounce with Sepia safe and sound. That squad was straight up terrifying to anyone who dared to face them. Meanwhile, the guy told Sepia this was probably the last day she'd see the hero trying to save her. Even with the odds stacked against him, Yushin didn't flinch as he pushed forward. Soon, Blackwind spotted the boy and his crew rolling up. Finally, the descendant he despised so much was back to throw down. At that moment, Yushin was already taking out enemy soldiers who dared to block his path. Without a second thought, they started alerting the defense units about the hero's arrival. Finally, a new battle to rescue Sepia was about to kick off. Inside the warehouse, some soldiers jumped at the chaos outside, and Sepia just sat there, quiet as a mouse, not saying a word. Finally, the girl who had crossed the hellish forest battlefield was spotted, and she had made it to the village she was aiming for. Exhausted, she collapsed to the ground, totally wiped from the journey. Then a carriage rolled up next to her. She couldn't see who was driving that thing too well. Soon, a dude cautiously approached her. She had found another resident, curious about her condition. The girl finally started to get up from the ground. This guy was Lee Yushin, who didn't even recognize himself. Thinking about this sad scene, Sepia started to tear up. She cried so much that her tears could fill the swimming pool. Her face was a waterfall of sadness at that moment. Noticing this, a soldier showed up and asked why she was crying, already guessing a few things. Meanwhile, outside, Yushin pushed even further, and he scared the pants off all the soldiers supposed to guard the warehouse. He was on a rampage, taking down anyone who dared to stand in his way. Many of them were finished off in a seriously brutal way, showing just how mad he was. Soon Yushin spotted Sepia and proved he remembered her. The girl, still crying, made eye contact with the boy and didn't react at all. Amidst the chaos, a young man got summoned by the queen, but no one knew why except for him and her. When he found out he'd inherited the whole castle, the boy looked confused, not really getting it. All that place meant to him was a cold woman, and the corpse of an emperor who looked just like him. Again, the queen showed up to explain what would happen if he turned down that gift. Then she dropped the bomb that if he refused, his beloved would be killed instead. Feeling the pressure, he widened his eyes, totally tense. He knew he couldn't say no to that offer, making it super unfair. So the boy agreed to become the emperor, but with one condition. That ring had to be delivered to his beloved ASAP. And just like that, their fates took a tragic turn. Seeing the boy cry over this mess, a man came over and patted his head, trying to comfort him. Soon, the man told him that if he lost his memory, his pain would vanish just like hers. After those words, the man placed his hand on the boy's back, starting the ritual. After a few moments, everything wrapped up, and he woke from the trance with wide open eyes. And because of that, the boy no longer remembered that girl. He looked at Sepia's tear-streaked face and didn't recognize her at all. And with that, he became the emperor of that kingdom to save her life. Back in reality, without wasting a second, Yushin broke all the ropes tying the girl up. Sepia looked super weak at that moment from being tied up for so long. Without a second thought, the hero hugged her tight, trying to squash the longing he felt. Soon he asked about how she was holding up and if anyone had hurt her. Still in the story, Sepia couldn't shake the thought of the boy not remembering her. Even in these wild times, the girl chose to stick with the boy and be his ride or die for life, no questions asked. She wasn't scared to face armies to back him up with her sword. She trained hard, ready to never let him down, no way. Sepia's hustle was real and only got stronger as time rolled on. Her fencing skills were on point, seriously impressive. While the queen and the boy chatted in the castle, his door creaked open. This, of course, grabbed both their attention right away. In walked the emperor's knight, strutting in like they owned the place. She took the gig just to stay close to her one true love. Days flew by and then bam, a massive beast crashed into their territory. Blackwind was there to wreck everything in sight. No chill. Its claws were on a rampage, taking out anything that moved, and sadly it took down a dude who was almost as strong as a god. In that moment, Sepia held the boy who was in a totally wrecked state. His heart was slowing down, fading away, and just like that, he became something, not someone. After that, the girl's tears flowed like a waterfall on full blast. Then someone popped up, telling her to chill with the crying. It was the old man who had comforted the boy before. He quickly dropped some hope, saying there was still a chance for him. Hearing this, the girl's face lit up, hope shining in her eyes. Then, out of nowhere, the old man slammed his staff on the ground. Suddenly, a huge light filled the space like a scene from a movie. The boy would forget everything to start fresh in a new world far away. After hearing this, the girl was all in for going with him. The old man decided to give her a shot. How cool is that? In the new world, the boy would face danger and she could protect him, crossing worlds. When the monk said this, the girl smiled, a little spark of joy. Before leaving, she thanked the old man for this epic chance. For her, just being in Li Yushin's lap was already a win. And all of this happened thanks to that old man's kind heart. Finally, we snap back to reality outside the war simulator. Amidst the chaos, a black car rolled up in front of the game developer's building. Slowly, a classy person stepped out of that fancy ride. Outside, a bunch of security guards were waiting, bowing to her like she was royalty. Soon, the old woman walked into the building with her cane, looking super serious. On the floor lay a dude who looked like he'd seen better days. As she walked deeper into the area, she noticed almost all the guys in that building were out cold. One of the old woman's big security guards watched all this with a blank stare. Meanwhile, the others were scouring the building looking for something. Amidst all the chaos, the old woman realized that dude had caused a ton of trouble. Meanwhile, the troublemaker Bernadette tried to bail from the scene. When he spotted the crew, the old man looked scared out of his mind. He quickly asked the fourth elder how she had even gotten there. She didn't say a word, just shot him a look that could freeze fire. Then she ordered her guards to grab the guy. At that moment, he begged the elder to hear him out about what went down. His screams were desperate, showing just how scared he really was. Then the elder asked one of her crew where Lee Himyu was. Without a second thought, the guy said he was in one of the simulators. Upon hearing this, she decided to rush there, determined to stop any more tears. At that moment, Yushin placed his hand on the girl's back, trying to lift her spirits. Sepia looked wiped out, but they had to bounce fast. The Allied army was waiting outside the abandoned warehouse. After hearing this from the boy, the girl got a little lost in thought. She finally broke the silence, telling the general she had her own army now and was super thankful for the rescue. Hearing this, Yushin realized he didn't just have Sepia as an ally anymore. His crew was made up of people who believed in him and were ready to fight for him. So Yushin and Sepia needed to head back, no time to waste. No one could be left behind. Everyone had to roll out together. No losses allowed. Yushin then gave orders for his crew to hustle to the fortress as fast as they could. But one of the soldiers wasn't feeling that plan at all. Upon realizing this, Yushin is totally lost on what that even meant. Then the soldier seriously asks his general to let him go home. Out of nowhere, one of the soldiers in the platoon gets hit in the chest by a weapon. Knowing they were about to dive into a new battle, Yushin was set on not leaving anyone behind to bite the dust alone. The enemy soldiers at that moment were on high alert, ready to pounce. Sadly, the blonde princess got ambushed by a whole squad of armed foes with no escape route. Then the mage rolls in, roasting the girl, who's trying to hold back the ocean with a paper dam. This just fires her up even more, itching to smack that guy. A little ways off, Blackwind was watching everything, sneaky as a cat. That dude was back again, ready to stir up another chaotic war. The Black Beast had tracked down the boy and the defenseless girl once more. Yushin and Blackwind were face to face again, almost gearing up for a wild brawl. If the big guy hadn't shown up, way fewer souls would be checking out the afterlife that day. For him, it was just embarrassing to see that boy's actions. When the girl spotted Blackwind, she got even more frantic. He was called the Lion of Neme, not just for his insane strength, but also for always flipping the script in tough situations, according to her. Plus, there were other factors that could totally mess up the protagonist in this new fight. Yushin was running on fumes from battling the Hydra, pushing through on pure willpower. He had only stubbornness as a crutch to keep moving. Blackwind's words weighed heavy on him, making the stakes of winning that fight sky high. Then, out of nowhere, the big guy leaps off his horse straight at the protagonist. He just got slammed with a ridiculous weight on his back. And if they fought like that, it didn't matter how many times Li Yushin came back, he'd die over and over, according to the princess of the kingdom. Then the boy gets grilled by Sepia, who asks if the weight of their lives wasn't too much for him. Hearing this, Yushin feels a bit lost, not getting what the girl meant. To her, it seemed like the real burden was the dreams the fallen wanted to chase through the general. But Yushin couldn't quickly answer this tough question. All those men had left behind important family members to follow Yushin into this mess. Based on that, he manages to open up and agrees with Sepia's theory. To her, it seemed like he really felt the weight of their dreams. In a wild move, Sepia presses her hand against the blade of her sword hard. Seeing this, Yushin freaks out, not getting what she was up to. The girl's hand, as expected, starts spilling a ton of vital red liquid right away. Then she begins to write something on the ground, and the tools for this were her vital red liquid and her injured finger. The message written was about the heart that belonged to her. While the girl did this, the soldiers watched everything, glued to the scene. Amid a terrifying wind that swept through, Sepia knew Yushin was carrying a heavy shell on his back, but they'd rather see wings on him to lift him to the sky instead of that weight. Amid this comforting message from Sepia, the blonde princess watched everything, worried about Yushin's risk of dying in that fight. But even so, he seemed totally chill in front of that girl. Very confused, he asks about those wings that should replace the heavy shell. But Sepia just gazes at him, all loving and soft. Suddenly, a huge noise snaps Yushin back to reality, reminding him he was about to jump into a tough battle. Then he looks back and asks if his allies would really stick with him in this fight. And soon he cracks a little smile, looking like he's got a secret plan to take down his opponent. Watching that, Blackwind thinks the boy is nuts, smiling in the middle of all this tension. Then Sepia gently caresses her beloved's face, and she tells him to carry the hope of the whole troop and fly into battle, bringing victory with him. After sharing this message with her dear one, Sepia gets weak and ends up fainting from it. Yushin, realizing what just happened, panics, super worried about the girl's condition. Then he takes care of her, keeping her in silence for a moment. You could see the weakness just in the look of that poor girl, who tried to smile to give strength to the protagonist. Yushin then reveals he totally got what she wanted to say. Then, finally, the protagonist starts to step away from Sepia and heads toward Blackwind, who was watching all this, knowing the fight was about to kick off. Yushin was closing in on his opponent, sword in hand, striding with serious determination. This battle was all about conviction, no fear or terror involved. Once again, Yushin was set to face Blackwind, who had a serious look, ready to dive into an epic showdown. In that moment, Blackwind sized up the kid and saw no fear or hostility in him. Not even a hint of terror was visible on the kid's face. But Li Yushin was super chill, not sweating what was coming next. This threw Blackwind off, who stared back with a gaze that could freeze lava. He wondered what kind of scheme the kid was cooking up. Soon, Blackwind underestimated him, thinking the quick hit to the neck would end it. That would wrap up the fight real quick, so the villain charged at Yushin. Blackwind gripped his massive axe, ready to swing at Yushin. The weapon was so huge it sliced through the air, leaving trails behind. You could see the effort on Blackwind's face as he swung it. Yushin, on the flip side, looked calm, almost too calm for a fight. Li Hyun-yu, meanwhile, was wishing for the kid's downfall in a seriously creepy way. Inside the company buildings, gunfire erupted. A bunch of people got taken out and were left sprawled on the floor. The shooters then declared that access to the Alog Korea simulator was officially revoked, and everyone still standing in the control room would be held until further notice. Suddenly, the old lady rolled in via the elevator. All the security guards immediately turned their focus to her. She'd asked how things were going inside the simulator. Without missing a beat, one of the guys told her things were not looking good at all. Seemed like something major had gone down. Hearing this, the old lady realized those kids were in for a rough ride. Back in the simulation, Sepia was glued to the start of the fight between her hero and the villain. Blackwind charged at the kid without mercy, throwing down some serious hits. Yushin, without a second thought, tried to block that massive axe with his tiny sword. Luckily, one of the kid's blocks worked, stopping the giant's weapon cold. Blackwind was totally caught off guard, not expecting that at all. Even Li Hyun-yu was shocked by the kid's strength. The princess wondered how he had blocked that attack so easily, being just a third-rank knight. What kind of dark magic Li Yushin was using was a total mystery to her. Even the boy himself couldn't believe he defended with a sword lighter than a feather, and a strange feeling washed over him. Fuming, Blackwind demanded to know what kind of tricks the kid was pulling, but Yushin didn't even reply, too focused on winning this battle. Soon, Blackwind noticed a shift in Li Yushin's movements. Without a second thought, the kid landed a powerful hit on his opponent. This sent the villain flying through the air for several meters, thanks to the sheer force. Desperate, Blackwind slammed his axe into the ground to slow himself down. After finally stopping, he told Yushin to quit messing around and unleash his terror already. At that moment, the clash between the giant and the kid was fully underway. Blackwind swung at Yushin with everything he had, using that massive axe. The boy, on his part, dodged the attacks effortlessly, looking like a pro. Wherever the axe swung, it kicked up dust from the speed of the giant. Yushin strolled across the battlefield looking super focused. This just made Blackwind even angrier, grinding his teeth in frustration. He wanted the kid to shine bright and bring some real excitement to the fight. To make that happen, he hurled the axe with all his might at Li Yushin. The effort was clear in Blackwind's eyes, mixed with pure rage. The power behind his swings was enough to shatter worlds. He wanted Li Yushin to face him head-on, but the kid dodged every single attack. And no matter how fast Blackwind swung the axe, it didn't matter. It was too much even for Blackwind's own soldiers, who got caught in his reckless swings. With the fight spiraling out of control, the big guy wondered what was going on. He couldn't even manage to wrinkle the kid's clothes. Finally, Li Yushin broke his silence right in the middle of the battle. Thus, he asked Blackwind what this so-called terror was that he mentioned. The big guy was totally speechless, just thinking about how fast the kid had snuck up on him. With wide eyes, Blackwind was shook, fearing the protagonist, who had his sword ready, poised to strike without holding back. After a few seconds of pure tension, the boy finally landed a solid hit on the opponent. Blackwind was sent flying, screaming like he just stubbed his toe on the coffee table. The princess of the kingdom watched everything, eyes wide as saucers. Even Lee Hyun-yu couldn't believe the chaos unfolding right in front of him. After soaring for a bit, Blackwind crashed hard onto the ground. He groaned from the pain, feeling like he just got hit by a truck. His first words were a savage insult aimed at Li Yushin, totally uncalled for. Then Blackwind noticed something weird in the air around him. It looked like mana swirling around, almost like it was alive. The big bad guy quickly shifted his focus, suspicion written all over his face. What was floating around was probably Terra, no doubt about it. So Blackwind decided to attack that weirdness, thinking it was Li Yushin pulling the strings. Then the purple smoke started moving in a totally different way. As a result, several soldiers got hit and dropped without even realizing what was happening. Then Li Yushin showed up, revealing that Terra was probably what his enemy had used to kill, scare, and dominate innocent folks. Hearing this, Blackwind got even angrier and charged at the protagonist. Even with this powerful and quick strike, Li Yushin dodged, still chatting about the whole thing. This made the big bad guy so mad he was grinding his teeth like he was chewing rocks. Meanwhile, the protagonist held his sword tight, gearing up to counterattack. After a moment of focus, he charged at Blackwind, delivering a jaw-dropping blow. He talked about Terra, describing it as this insane feeling of fire igniting inside him, giving him the power to face his stronger enemy. Meanwhile, Blackwind couldn't stop screaming from the pain of that hit. Without missing a beat, Yushin took advantage of this moment to drain even more vital red liquid from his opponent. From a distance, everyone was watching the fight, jaws dropped in shock. The princess of the kingdom was on edge, wondering what was going on with Li Yushin. If he crossed that line, she thought he might never come back. Sepia, on the other hand, was looking tired, watching the fight and worrying about her guy. Lee Hyun-yu was shouting for the general to get up, trying to hype up his evil buddy. Even as a cheap knockoff, he couldn't go down like that. So the wizard's only wish was for that dude to strike back ASAP. Even if he bit the dust afterward, all that mattered was taking out Li Yushin first. But no matter what, the protagonist showed zero signs of weakness. On the ground, totally spent, Blackwind was wondering why it all ended like this, with him losing. In his mind, Yushin was just a kid and nothing made sense. Then the protagonist replied that the power he used was something ordinary folks couldn't even dream of having. Blackwind, hearing this, was a bit confused and asked where the kid was going with that. Yushin's crew had ignored their fates in the face of absolute power. Their lives were precious and should have gone back to their families, not handed over to the general, which led them to their doom. But what Yushin was trying to say was that it was their deep desire. They really wanted to protect him and help him, even after death, which pushed him to keep going. Hearing those deep words from the kid, Blackwind's eyes went wide in surprise. And that's why it didn't matter if he was using Terra or other types of magic, according to the protagonist. What really mattered was that Blackwind would be taken down, and finally, Li Yushin would head home. He owed that to his brave squad who fought hard in the army. After giving this whole speech acknowledging his crew's efforts, Li Yushin moved closer to the enemy. He wouldn't go home alone, they'd all go together. Then out of nowhere, Blackwind found the strength to grip his wicked axe tight. Without a second thought, he slammed his weapon into the battlefield ground with all his might. This caused a slight tremor in the area, and a kind of glare lit up around there. Blackwind seemed to be sucking all the energy from the place to shield himself. The axe turned into this insane barrier, packing a wild punch to keep its owner safe. With that, Li Yushin couldn't even get close to take down the big dude. Blackwen, on the other hand, was gripping that axe like it was his lifeline. He looked like he was driving that thing deeper into the ground, claiming his turf. With every second, he seemed to get more and more invincible. Blackwen quickly figured out that the armor boosted some serious stats, like control, power-ups, and the strength of the Terra he was throwing around. This protective gear looked like it was expanding with every heartbeat. The vibe got super tense, with Blackwen shouting that he'd drag Li Yushin to hell with him. The princess and her squad were doing everything they could to shield themselves from that crazy energy the villain was throwing down. Yushin, meanwhile, spotted Sepia trying to move in all the chaos. He had this tense look, worried about his girl being totally exposed. Then, out of nowhere, a massive explosion goes off nearby, leaving just a blinding flash of fire. Meanwhile, the old lady and her guards were glued to the screens in the control room. One of the guys tried to convince her to pull the plug on the simulation, but she shot him down hard. She was all about keeping the boy in the simulation, saying if they interfered, he'd probably bite the dust with everyone else. So he had to stay in that simulation capsule, no outside help allowed. All they could do in the control room was watch closely and hope the boy would come out on top. The old lady really wanted the hero to walk out of hell on his own 2 feet. Meanwhile, inside the simulation, Li Yushin was giving it his all to reach Blackwen and finally take him down. Suddenly, the princess screams his name, panicking as she gets pulled closer to the enemy. Sadly, the hero couldn't grab her hand and had to let her go, feeling pretty helpless. Sepia, though, was chilling, looking sweet and calm, not even fazed by the chaos around her. At that moment, everything on the battlefield was getting sucked toward Blackwen with this insane force. Then Li Yushin realized it was nearly impossible to reach the core with all those hellish flames surrounding his foe. After all the noise, Blackwen finally spoke up, making it clear he wanted to wipe out the whole Yushin family line. Behind all this was Li Himyu casting some dark magic that was pumping up the villain even more. He quickly figured out that everyone was about to bite the dust, so he decided to mess with the reset time of the simulation. With that, Li Yushin would get tossed into a never-ending fire maze, and nothing in his mind would be left to tell the tale. At that moment, it felt like the hero had zero chance of winning since Blackwen was literally giving his all for the win. But giving up? Nah, that wasn't in Li Yushin's playbook. He was gonna fight, till the very end. Meanwhile, his body outside the simulation was struggling to handle the effects of that wicked battle, writhing in pain. He wasn't about to hand over the win to Blackwen that easily. And the info panel pops up saying simulation number 756 was about to kick off. That seemed to pump up the hero, who didn't care how much that enemy roasted him. Again, the info panel shows up, announcing more simulations were starting. For Yushin, it didn't matter how many times he bit the dust. Even in simulation number 832, he was ready to restart 1,000,000 times to hit his goal. With every tick of the clock, the info panel kept popping up, announcing even more simulations. Amidst all those system messages, Li Yushin called out to his opponent, ready to say something. With each simulation that kicked off, Blackwen looked happier and happier, riding high on his victories. But Li Yushin knew Blackwen would never crush his spirit, no matter what. On the battlefield, all that could be seen were massive flames and magic traces. Plus, the info panel kept flashing, highlighting the start of more simulations. Yushin's voice rang out, always saying he'd rise from the ashes. As time went on, more and more fire took over the scene. Even after 998 tries, Li Yushin still hadn't taken down his tough enemy. But he wasn't about to throw in the towel, pushing hard to break through that fiery wall. As expected, he couldn't reach his goal and got burned again, kicking off a new simulation. The protagonist's motivation was the wings of his crew that had been entrusted to him. Inside the control room, the old woman's crew watched everything in awe, totally clueless about what was going down. Li Yushin's vibe and looks had completely transformed, with a ton of terror swirling around him. The protagonist's glow-up was obvious, and the energy around him showed it off perfectly. And the info panel popped up again, announcing that simulation number 1000 was about to kick off. Yushin's power was so epic he could float in the chaos, sword in hand, surrounded by some serious forces. Watching this on the screens, one of the simulation controllers realized this kid was the 8th apostle. In that moment, Yushin charged forward like a tsunami, wiping out everything and everyone in his path. Then the old woman celebrated that all that madness had finally wrapped up for the boy. He was already at the protection core, just a few meters from Blackwen. Lucky for him, he had made it through that entire wall of fire without a scratch. His energies were already clashing with those of his enemy, signaling that the end of this fight was near. From a distance, Blackwen's soldiers watched with tense faces, realizing they were about to get wrecked. The kingdom's princess, meanwhile, looked totally stunned, unable to believe her eyes. Then a massive ball of terror formed around the protagonist and Blackwen. Seeing this, the blonde princess started shouting for Li Yushin to stop, worried he might not come back if he pushed forward. Even Sepia looked super worried about her beloved's situation. The protagonist, for his part, had a worn-out look from that exhausting battle. But thankfully, his beams of terror managed to neutralize the enemy's energy. This gave the boy the chance to land a final blow on Blackwen without mercy. After Yushin finally hit his target, the wizard's ring shattered into pieces. Li Himyu soon freaked out, showing a face full of despair. To him, it was a joke that this kid had messed up his plans and, on top of that, had become the 8th apostle. Realizing he had totally lost that war, Li Himyu cursed the protagonist. Then finally, Yushin broke through the barrier between the real world and the simulation. His body slowly started to move, emerging from that cursed capsule. After a few moments, the boy began to float in the air. But either way, the terror war was still raging in the simulation world. Yushin also floated there on the battlefield, sword in hand, a symbol of his victory. He faced Blackwen with a tired look, but also a sense of accomplishment. The villain, on his part, was suffering, living out his last moments in that world. The sync between reality and simulation was so strong that Yushin's body mirrored his moves in battle. With that, he aimed his sword with all his might at Blackwen's chest, and finally decided to take out that villain in the most epic way possible, delivering a solid and fatal blow right to his chest. This attack even shattered the armor Blackwen wore for protection. On his face, the pain and outrage were clear after losing this fight. Then he let out his last scream before finally heading to an alternate world. After that, Blackwen's body fell freely towards the ground. And suddenly, a massive flash lit up the battlefield. Soon, a ball that looked like a portal appeared, wrapping around the protagonist. This sphere, after a few seconds, began to vanish without any explanation. From the battlefield, only a light brighter than the sun could be seen. The kingdom's princess and the surviving soldiers tried everything to shield themselves from that unknown force. Meanwhile, Lee Hyung-yu thought all of this was way too insane to be real. He wanted to bounce out of there ASAP, and if he could, he would never step foot in that place. Suddenly, someone approached him with a suggestion. That old man told Lee Hyung-yu not to even think about bailing. Seeing that the fourth elder was there, he was totally shocked, not getting how she had entered the simulation like that. Immediately, he figured she was there because of some wild rumors, all thanks to the company's manager and his orders. Then, out of nowhere, the old woman, without any explanation, poked Lee Hyung-yu's forehead in a really weird way. After that, she commented that those annoying ones had a pretty irritating cry. Meanwhile, a hole was forming on Lee Hyung-yu's forehead and his eyes filled with tears, fearing his imminent end. Then suddenly, the man began to disintegrate like paper and let out his last desperate scream. In a few moments, no part of Lee Hyung-yu's body could be seen anymore, leaving only his groan of pain as a memory. Now finally, we're back in the real world, where Yushin was still chilling in the simulation capsule. There were some remnants of vital red liquid splattered all over the floor, looking like a horror movie scene. But no cap, Lee Yushin's mission in the game world was still on. Spotting a blue flash on the battlefield, the princess realizes it's probably the general. From a distance, a somewhat familiar figure is seen swinging a sword. After a few moments, it's clear that it's Yushin out there. The princess, seeing that the boy is still alive, can't believe her eyes. Without a second thought, she starts thanking the universe before finally reaching out to him. Out of nowhere, the fourth elder pops up, saying her time is running out, and the girl is shocked to see her beloved grandma. Meanwhile, Yushin looks like he's in a daze, standing there with a totally wrecked expression. Seeing this, the girl begs her grandma to save the general since he hasn't kicked the bucket for the 1000th time yet, even if it means she has to seal the boy's death to do it. Hearing her granddaughter's plea, she explains that if the girl wants to protect someone, she needs to toughen up instead of crying, just like Sepia did. Thinking about this, the blonde girl starts scanning her surroundings. Soon she spots Sepia sprinting as fast as she can to reach Yushin. Even the elder is watching this with serious focus. Yushin's body after the battle is burned and pretty wrecked with scars everywhere. But still, Sepia is giving it her all to get to her beloved. She moves toward him with all the determination in the world. Then out of nowhere, Yushin opens his eyes and realizes the scenery has totally changed. Soon he notices someone super close to him. That place feels kind of familiar to the boy. And there's the person who's always been waiting for him, his dear friend Sepia. Without hesitation, Yushin makes it clear that he's finally back. The vibe around them is so intense that it wraps around Yushin and Sepia. Without thinking twice, Yushin bolts toward his girl, ready to give her a massive hug. After all the struggle and chaos, they finally manage to embrace. After a few seconds in Sepia's arms, Yushin ends up fainting, taking his last breaths. And once again, fate pulls a fast one, connecting the two. Without a second thought, Sepia calls for the elder, desperate to protect her beloved. She just watches the scene unfold in silence, looking super worried. After a few seconds, she breaks the tension and tells Sepia that all miracles come with a price. But to seal the boy's death, the girl doesn't care about the cost as long as she's with him. The price of the sealing means his memories will fade away, and that includes all the moments they shared, every single one. But this condition doesn't faze Sepia, who agrees without a second thought. With that confirmation, the fourth elder jumps right into the sealing ritual on the boy. From a distance, the princess watches everything with a seriously impressed look. Already in the middle of the ritual, the old woman warns the girl not to shed a tear. After a few seconds, an incredible mana fills the area around Sepia and Yushin. In the kingdom, only a thick fog can be seen. That castle, once the stage for countless battles, now has no one left to fight. The destruction in that place is clear after all of Yushin's attempts to escape the simulation. Then suddenly, an info panel pops up reading details about the program. Meanwhile, everything seems to lose its spark and joy. The princess freezes, staring at the horizon, unable to believe her eyes. That simulator is finally coming to an end. No sword will need to be drawn again to take innocent lives. After a few moments of reset, the simulator confirms it's shutting down. And just like that, a flash like a phone camera appears, bringing everything to a close. Looking out the window from where he is, Lee Yushin sees snow falling from the sky. Last month, something super tragic went down, according to his own words. Rumors say Yushin got into an accident on the way to the holiday ceremony, and it was snowing hard that day. Because of that, he ended up in a coma and lost all his memories. But the weirdest part, the boy has muscular arms, and his hands are covered in calluses. This makes him wonder if that coma really happened like they said. Looking more closely out the window, he spots something that totally grabs his attention. A girl was chilling against a tree, checking out that building. Her hair was whipping around in the wind from that snowstorm. Yushin's eyes go wide like he just unlocked his secret level. That silhouette looks super familiar to him. He bolts towards the street, not caring about anything else. That girl was sliding into a black car ready to bounce. Yushin, meanwhile, was sprinting down the stairs like he was in a race against time. After a few moments, the girl hops in and slams the door shut. Even with that mad dash, Yushin can't stop the car from rolling out. His shocked face shows just how frustrated he is about it. The girl thought she could just vanish like that, even if they might never meet again. She definitely wasn't changing her mind no matter what the adults thought, who were looking at her with this proud vibe. Apparently, that was supposed to be a promise, or so she said. Then Yushin spots something dangling from that tree. It was a necklace with a ring looking all mysterious. When he touches it, he feels something totally unreal. He had become, in that familiar spot, the general again, and he told Sepia to be the official guardian of his heart. The two locked eyes in that soap opera moment with an epic sunset. So Yushin realizes without a doubt he knew that girl. And he knew that no matter what, they would definitely meet again one day.
Guys, that's the end of the video. If you liked this video, please leave a comment in the comment section. Also subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. Like the video and share it too. Thank you for watching and see you next time again.